The rifle felt like an extension of her soul. Master Sergeant Sarah Kate Brennan settled into position behind the Barrett M82, her breathing slow and deliberate as desert wind whispered across the Fort Benning range. 40 years old seemed impossible when she looked in the mirror, but 48 felt like gospel truth when her knees protested against the concrete shooting platform. 2 years until mandatory retirement. 730 days before the Army thanked her for 28 years of service and showed her the door like yesterday's coffee grounds. The young lieutenant beside her fidgeted with his rifle, all nervous energy and cocksure swagger, wrapped in a fresh uniform that still had creases sharp enough to cut paper. Second Lieutenant Ryan Brooks, 24 years old, recent graduate of sniper school, top of his class according to his file. According to his mouth, he was God's gift to long-range engagement. "Ma'am, with all respect," Brooks said, adjusting his digital scope for the third time in as many minutes, "the ballistic computer does all the math now. Reading wind with your finger and watching grass blow? That's old school. We've got technology that eliminates human error." Sarah didn't look at him. Her eyes tracked a piece of tumbleweed rolling across the range at 800 meters, noting how the wind pushed it, how the gusts came in patterns if you were patient enough to see them. She'd been patient for 28 years. Patience was the one thing youth could never buy, borrow, or download. "Take your shot, Lieutenant," she said quietly. Brooks settled behind his rifle, state-of-the-art optics gleaming in the morning sun. The computer screen built into his scope flickered with data: wind speed, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, even the Coriolis effect. $30,000 of technology doing the thinking for him. He exhaled halfway, held it, squeezed the trigger. The target at 1,000 meters didn't move. A clean miss. Brooks frowned at his scope, tapped the screen like it had betrayed him. "Computer says the wind is 7 miles per hour from the east." "Computer's reading the wind here," Sarah said. "Not the wind at 500 meters. Not the wind at the target. Just here." She removed the digital scope from his rifle, handed him iron sights that had been in service since before he was born. "Try again." "Ma'am, I can't make that shot with iron sights." "Then watch." Sarah positioned herself behind her rifle. No computer, no digital assistance, just steel and glass in 28 years of reading what the earth told her. She placed her finger in the air, felt the wind kiss her skin, watched the heat shimmer rise from the sand, noted how the flag at 600 meters hung limp while the one at 400 snapped in the breeze. Wind was never simple. Wind was a language you learned one hard lesson at a time. She breathed in, let half the air escape, found that space between heartbeats where the whole world went perfectly still. Her finger touched the trigger with the gentleness of a prayer. The rifle spoke once. 1,000 meters downrange, the target's center mass erupted. Brooks stared through the spotting scope, then at her, then back at the target like he was watching a magic trick and couldn't find the wires. "How did you—" "Technology fails, Lieutenant. Sand gets in the circuits. Batteries die. Satellites go offline. But the Earth doesn't lie. Wind doesn't need Wi-Fi. You want to be a great sniper, learn to read what never changes. Learn to be patient." She stood, her knees reminding her again that 48 was not 24, that every year added weight even if the scale stayed the same. "Dismissed." "And Lieutenant?" "Ma'am, remember this. Someday you'll be 48. Someday someone younger will tell you you're obsolete. When that day comes, you'll understand what I'm teaching you isn't about wind. It's about proving that experience matters more than the latest upgrade." 6 months earlier, the briefing room at Fort Hood had smelled like burned coffee and the particular anxiety that comes before deployment. Sarah sat in the back row, watching younger officers claim the front seats. Their eagerness painted across faces that hadn't yet learned what war actually cost. Colonel James Hartford stood at the podium, 58 years old, gray hair cut high and tight, eyes that had seen Mogadishu and Fallujah and a dozen other places that turned boys into ghosts. "Vanguard Task Force," Hartford began, his voice carrying the gravel of too many years shouting orders over gunfire, "is a rapid response unit tasked with border interdiction. Cartels are moving military-grade weapons across the Texas-Mexico line. Not rifles, not handguns. We're talking anti-aircraft missiles, military explosives, hardware that can shoot down our birds or level our bases. Our mission is simple: find it, stop it, capture or eliminate anyone moving it." A captain in the second row raised his hand. Sir, with respect, Master Sergeant Brennan is 2 years from mandatory retirement. Is she the right fit for high-intensity operations? Sarah felt every eye in the room turn toward her, felt the weight of the question that wasn't really a question, more like a polite way of asking if the old lady should maybe stick to teaching instead of doing. Hartford's expression could have frozen gasoline. Captain Voss, Master Sergeant Brennan has more trigger time than everyone in this room combined. She's trained half the snipers currently deployed overseas. She holds the record for longest confirmed kill in this battalion at 2,800 meters, a shot she made in Kandahar while taking indirect fire. If you have a problem with experience, feel free to transfer out of Vanguard right now. Silence, the kind that makes people examine their boots. Hartford continued, this isn't a mission for the young and reckless. This requires patience, discipline, the ability to wait 11 hours without moving because that's what the shot demands. Master Sergeant Brennan embodies those qualities. She's in. Anyone else want to question my selections? No one did. After the briefing, Sarah found Hartford in his office, pouring whiskey into coffee like it was a normal Tuesday morning ritual. You didn't have to defend me, she said. I didn't defend you. I defended my tactical decision. You're the best asset I have. He pushed the whiskey bottle toward her. She shook her head. 2 years, Kate, then what? She'd asked herself that question every morning for 6 months, 2 years until 50, until the Army politely but firmly suggested she'd given enough, served enough, and now it was time to let younger bodies take the weight. She'd given 28 years, missed her daughter's childhood for deployments, traded marriage for medals, sacrificed everything normal people had for the honor of serving something bigger than herself. And in 2 years, none of it would matter. She'd be a retired master sergeant with a pension and a service record, and absolutely no idea who Sarah Kate Brennan was without the uniform. I'll figure it out, she said, which was a lie, and they both knew it. Vanguard ships out in 3 weeks. Meet your team, learn their names, make them trust you. Because when it goes wrong, and it always goes wrong, trust is the only thing that brings people home. The team assembled in the motor pool under a Texas sun that felt like God's own blowtorch. 90 personnel, mix of infantry, intelligence, combat medics, engineers, everyone cross-trained for rapid response. Sarah walked among them, learning faces, shaking hands, listening to the particular music of 90 different voices, all pretending they weren't nervous. Sergeant First Class Marcus Rodriguez found her first. 52 years old, built like a concrete bunker, former Ranger with 3 deployments and a laugh that sounded like grinding gears. Everyone called him Bull, and if you spent 10 seconds in his presence, you understood why. He had the subtle grace of a freight train and the tactical awareness of a man who'd survived 2 decades by being too stubborn to die. Reaper, he said, using the call sign she'd earned in Afghanistan. Heard you still shoot like the devil himself. Heard you still think cover means standing in the open and cursing louder than the incoming rounds. Bull grinned, gap-toothed and genuine. Cover's for people who haven't met me. You playing poker tonight? If you're playing, I'm taking your money. Promises, promises. Staff Sergeant David Williams approached next, 45 years old, soft-spoken, carrying a worn Bible in his cargo pocket like some men carried lucky coins. They called him Preacher, though he'd never pushed his faith on anyone. He just lived it, quiet and steady, the kind of man who held your hand while you did and made you believe you were going somewhere better. Ma'am, good to have you with us. I'm running a study tonight, Psalms if you want to join. No pressure. Sarah wasn't religious, hadn't been since her mother's funeral when she was 16, and the chaplain said God had a plan, and all she could think was that God's plan seemed to involve a lot of good people dying badly. But Preacher's Bible study wasn't about converting anyone. It was about community, about 90 people finding 90 different ways to deal with the weight they carried. I'll be there, she said. Sergeant Emma Cavanaugh materialized like she'd been conjured. 29 years old, combat medic with hands that could restart a heart or field dress a wound while taking fire. They called her Doc, and according to her file, she'd saved 12 lives in her last deployment, despite taking shrapnel in both legs during an ambush. She looked at Sarah with the particular intensity of someone evaluating a patient. Ma'am, when's the last time you had your knees checked? I saw you favor your left coming off the truck. My knees are fine, Doc. Your knees are 48 years old and you've been running on them for 28 years. They're not fine, they're functional, there's a difference. Sarah liked her immediately. You always this forward with Master Sergeants? Only ones I plan on keeping alive. You die on me, I take it personal. Captain Rachel Voss watched from near the command vehicle, 36 years old, intelligence analyst with a mind that processed information like a supercomputer and instincts that had kept her battalion out of 3 ambushes during her last deployment. She had the look of someone perpetually solving equations in her head, always 2 steps ahead of every conversation. When she met Sarah's eyes across the motor pool, there was something there. Recognition, maybe. Or just the assessment of one professional evaluating another. Master Sergeant Brennan, Voss said, approaching with a tablet full of intelligence briefs. I've been reviewing cartel movement patterns. There's something off about the shipments. They're too organized, too precise, like someone's coordinating from our side. You bring this to Colonel Hartford? Mentioned it. He said to keep investigating but stay quiet until we have proof. I could use your tactical perspective, your experience reading hostile movements. Sarah took the tablet, scanned the data. Voss was right. The patterns were too clean. Cartels were chaos operators, opportunistic, reactive. This looked planned, methodical, military. Keep digging, Sarah said, but carefully. If there's a mole, they'll be watching for anyone who gets too close. First Lieutenant Casey Mitchell bounded over like an overexcited puppy, 26 years old, armor officer with more enthusiasm than common sense. Specialist Andre Washington followed at a more measured pace, 22 years old, communications specialist who could hack a satellite or fix a radio with spit and prayer, depending on what the situation required. They called him Tech, and despite his age, he had the wisdom to listen more than he spoke. Master Sergeant Robert Patterson appeared from the mechanics bay, 49 years old, weapons specialist, who could disassemble and reassemble any firearm blindfolded and probably asleep. Everyone called him Gunny despite never being in the Marines, because some nicknames just fit. He and Sarah had served together in Iraq during the surge, had held position on a rooftop for 16 hours while insurgents tried to overrun their position. He'd fed her ammunition and she'd sent rounds downrange until her shoulder turned purple from recoil. They'd earned their bond in brass and blood. Reaper, Gunny said, offering a canteen. Ready to do this one more time? Getting too old for this, Bobby. We're all too old for this. That's why they need us. Young ones don't know how to be old and mean yet. Sergeant First Class Linda Zhao, 38 years old, another woman in a world of men, another fighter who'd earned respect the hard way by being too good to ignore. Captain Felix Ortega, 41, second in command, father of 3 girls whose photos he carried in his helmet. Sergeant First Class Dylan Cross, 35, demolitions expert with a dark sense of humor and steady hands. 3 weeks of training, 3 weeks of learning how 90 different people moved, thought, fought. 3 weeks of becoming something more than individuals, becoming a unit. Poker games ran late into the night, Bull taking everyone's money while telling stories about Mogadishu that got more elaborate with each retelling. Preacher's Bible study drew 20 people, then 30, then 40, not because they all believed, but because shared ritual was its own kind of faith. Doc ran everyone through emergency medical drills until they could apply tourniquets in their sleep. Tech taught the old-timers how to use the new communications gear, while they taught him how to navigate when all the technology died. Sarah found herself training the younger snipers, passing down knowledge earned in 24 countries across 2 decades. The patience required to hold position. The discipline to wait for the perfect shot even when every instinct screamed to shoot now. The math of wind and distance and the 1,000 small variables that turned a miss into a kill. On the last night before deployment, someone snapped a photograph. All 90 of them, pressed together in front of the barracks, smiling like they believed they were invincible. Sarah stood in the back row, Gunny to her left, Bull to her right, surrounded by faces that had become family. She didn't know then that it was the last time she'd see them all alive. Didn't know that photo would become a memorial. Sometimes ignorance is the only mercy God grants. The visit to her father happened 3 days before deployment. Sarah drove to the VA hospital in Austin, navigating white corridors that smelled of disinfectant and old men waiting to die. Colonel James Brennan, retired, sat in his room staring at a television he had muted. 76 years old, decorated Korean War veteran, Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and lately early-stage dementia that came and went like tide. Katie girl, he said when she entered, using the nickname from childhood. You're in uniform. Deploying? Border mission, Dad. Nothing major. Nothing's ever nothing in this business. His eyes sharpened, clarity breaking through fog. How old are you now? 48. 48. Same age I was when they asked me to make the choice. He trailed off, stared at his hands like they belonged to someone else. What choice, Dad? The one between good and evil. Except both options were evil, and I had to pick which one I could live with. He looked at her, suddenly intense. You ever have to make that kind of choice, Katie? The kind where everyone dies and you just decide how many? Sarah sat beside him, took his weathered hand. Dad, you did your duty. You served with honor. That's all anyone can ask. Honor. He laughed, bitter and dry. Honor is what we call it afterward to sleep at night. During, it's just math. Terrible, bloody math. You're tired. The dementia makes you remember things wrong. No. His grip tightened on her hand. I remember perfectly. That's the problem. I remember the moment I became what I am, and I see it coming for you too. Coming for me? The choice. It always comes. You'll be somewhere, probably alone, probably in the dark, and someone will ask you to choose. And whatever you pick, you'll carry it forever. He released her hand, slumped back. I chose you, Katie. I always chose you. Remember that when they tell you what I did. She didn't understand, chalked it up to dementia's cruel trick of mixing memory and nightmare. She kissed his forehead, promised to visit after the deployment, walked away from the hospital with his words echoing in her head like artillery in the distance. The mission briefing came at 0:30, 3 hours before dawn, 90 personnel crammed into a room too small for their collective tension. Captain Marcus Webb stood at the front, 39 years old, logistics coordinator with a reputation for precision that bordered on obsessive. He ran through the intelligence with military efficiency. Cartel shipment, 500 kilograms of C-4 military-grade explosive, crossing the border near Big Bend National Park. Route calculated based on intercepts and informant intelligence. The shipment will cross at 0800 hours, Webb said, highlighting the map. Vanguard will position along Highway 118, establish interdiction zone, capture or neutralize the convoy. Intelligence suggests 6 to 8 vehicles, 20 to 30 combatants. Expect heavy resistance. Colonel Hartford took over. This is not a skirmish. This is a statement. Cartels think they can move military explosives through our territory. We're going to correct that assumption. Rules of engagement are weapons-free once they cross into U.S. territory. No warning shots, no mercy. These are not refugees. These are enemy combatants moving weapons of war. Treat them accordingly. Sarah studied the map. The route made sense tactically. Good sight lines, multiple fallback positions, terrain that favored defense. But something felt wrong, a whisper in the back of her mind, the same instinct that had kept her alive through 2 decades of combat. Sir, she said, what's our overwatch position? Hartford pointed to a ridgeline 2,800 meters from the primary route. You'll position here, Reaper. Full nest setup. Communications with command, secondary extraction route if things get hot. You're our eyes and our hammer. 2,800 meters. Perfect sniper range. But it also meant she'd be alone, separate from the main element. If things went wrong, she'd watch it happen through a scope and be powerless to stop it. Who else goes to Overwatch? Just you. I need everyone else with the main force. Your job is to provide reconnaissance and precision fire support. Gunny caught her eye from across the room. He felt it too. The wrongness. But orders were orders, and soldiers followed orders because the alternative was chaos. Deployment came with the sunrise. Convoy of vehicles rolling into the West Texas wasteland, where the land turned harsh and beautiful and utterly indifferent to human ambition. Sarah separated from the main element at the predetermined point, Humvee carrying her and her spotter to the ridgeline, while Vanguard continued toward the interdiction zone. The climb took 40 minutes, hauling gear up rocks that tried to slice through her gloves. By the time she reached the summit, sweat soaked her uniform despite the morning cool. She established her hide, setting up the Barrett M82 with the deliberate care of ritual. Rangefinder, wind gauge, spotting scope, communications gear, everything arranged within arm's reach. Below, 2,800 meters away, she watched through her scope as Vanguard positioned themselves. Vehicles spread across the highway, infantry taking cover behind rock formations. The trap was set, and all they had to do was wait for prey to wander in. Her radio crackled. Reaper, this is Vanguard 6, radio check. Vanguard 6, Reaper reads you, Lima Charlie. Copy. Maintain position, estimated 30 mics until contact. 30 minutes. Sarah settled in, controlled her breathing, became part of the landscape. This was what she was built for. The waiting, the patience, the absolute stillness required to be predator instead of prey. 0812. Movement on the road. 6 vehicles, dust trailing behind them like smoke. Through her scope, Sarah counted combatants. 22 visible, probably more inside the trucks. The convoy moved with military precision, spacing between vehicles perfect. No nervous acceleration or deceleration. Professional. Vanguard 6, Reaper has visual on 6 vehicles, 24 plus combatants, approaching your position from the south. Copy, Reaper, stand by. The convoy entered the kill zone. For a moment, everything was perfect. The trap ready to spring. Vanguard positioned ideally, Sarah's crosshairs tracking the lead vehicle's driver. Then the world exploded. The IED detonated under the lead Vanguard vehicle at 0814. A blast so massive she felt it through the earth 2,800 meters away. The truck disintegrated, bodies hurled into the air like rag dolls, metal shrieking as it tore itself apart. Before the debris finished falling, mortar fire rained from 3 directions. Not random, not scattered, precise, coordinated, devastating. Someone had pre-positioned those mortars. Someone who knew exactly where Vanguard would be. Sarah's training took over. Vanguard 6 Reaper, you are taking indirect fire from 3 positions. I have eyes on muzzle flashes, requesting permission to engage. Static. Then a voice, not Hartford, someone younger, panicked. Reaper, all units, break contact and return to base. This is a direct order, I say again. All units break contact. Negative, Vanguard has wounded. I can provide covering fire. Reaper, this is command. You are ordered to withdraw immediately. Through her scope, Sarah watched her family die. RPG fire destroying the communications vehicle. Small arms fire cutting through soldiers who tried to return fire. Gunny Patterson throwing himself over Doc Kavanaugh, taking rounds meant for her, both of them falling together. Bull Rodriguez making a last stand at a disabled Humvee, firing until his ammunition ran dry, and then using the rifle as a club until they overwhelmed him. Preacher Williams dragging wounded toward cover that didn't exist, his mouth moving in prayer or screams. Sarah couldn't tell which, before a burst of automatic fire stitched across his chest, and he fell like a puppet with cut strings. Captain Voss, brilliant Rachel Voss, trying to coordinate a defense with a radio that no longer worked, taking cover behind a rock that didn't protect her when the mortar round landed 3 feet away. Casey Mitchell, young and stupid and brave, charging the enemy with nothing but a sidearm and fury, making it 15 feet before concentrated fire cut him down. Felix Ortega, father of 3, taking shrapnel that opened him from stomach to sternum, trying to hold his insides inside while crawling toward his weapon. 43 minutes. Sarah counted every one. Forced by her own command to remain in position, to watch through her scope as 90 people who trusted her were systematically slaughtered. She had perfect firing solutions. Could have taken out the mortar teams. Could have provided suppressing fire for a retreat. Could have done something besides witness. But orders were orders, and soldiers obeyed orders, and sometimes orders meant watching your family die while you did nothing. At 0905, silence fell like a guillotine blade. No more gunfire, no more screams. Just wind blowing across a killing field, strewn with bodies and burning vehicles, and the particular smell of cordite and blood that Sarah would carry in her nostrils forever. Reaper, this is command. You are cleared to investigate. Sarah descended from the ridge, legs moving on autopilot while her mind tried to process what her eyes had seen. The walk took 20 minutes. Every step brought her closer to confirmation she didn't want. The massacre scene looked like God's own slaughterhouse. Bodies everywhere, twisted and broken, some burned beyond recognition, others intact enough that Sarah could see their final expressions. Terror, pain, betrayal. She found Gunny first, body covering Doc like he'd tried to shield her even in death. Sarah knelt beside them, pulled their dog tags with hands that didn't shake because she wouldn't allow them to shake. Not yet, not while there was work to do. Bull Rodriguez lay surrounded by brass casings, rifle bent from use as a melee weapon. 3 dead cartel soldiers near him bearing witness to his final stand. Sarah took his tags, added them to the collection growing in her hand. Preacher Williams had died with his Bible clutched against his chest, pages soaked red, but the word still visible. Psalm 91. He will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. Sarah closed the book, took his tags, moved to the next body. Captain Voss. Young, brilliant Rachel Voss. The explosion had been merciful in its completeness. Sarah found her identification, added it to the collection, tried not to think about the intelligence reports Voss had been investigating, the patterns she'd seen in cartel movements. 90 people, 90 sets of tags. Sarah moved through the carnage with mechanical precision, cataloging the dead, bearing witness to the price paid for orders she didn't understand. Near the communications vehicle, she found something that made her stop. Radio equipment, shattered but not destroyed, still running on battery backup. She pulled the black box recorder, cracked its archbone, found the data drive intact. Connecting it to her personal tablet, Sarah scrolled through encrypted transmissions, using passwords she shouldn't know but did, because 28 years in military intelligence taught you how to access what needed accessing. Buried in the noise, she found it, a transmission from 3 hours before the ambush, encrypted with protocols that required top-level clearance. Voice analysis would identify the speaker, but she didn't need analysis. She recognized Captain Marcus Webb's voice. Package delivered. Vanguard will intercept at 0800. Proceed to Phase 2 once engagement begins. Response came from a different voice, accented, speaking English carefully. And the primary target, the one called White Phoenix? Negative. White Phoenix will not be with main element. She will be positioned separately. Then operation is compromised. We want White Phoenix. Proceed regardless. She will come to the bodies. That is when you take her. The transmission ended. Sarah played it again and again, each repetition hammering home the truth she'd been avoiding. This wasn't a cartel ambush on a convoy. This was a planned massacre designed to draw out one specific target. White Phoenix, her call sign from Afghanistan, 2011, when her team had killed 3 Chinese intelligence officers embedded with Taliban forces. An international incident hushed up through diplomatic channels and classified briefings. China had put a $2 million bounty on White Phoenix, on her. Sarah moved through the wreckage with new understanding. The IED placement required detailed knowledge of Vanguard's route and timing. The mortar positions had been dug 48 hours in advance, waiting for targets that wouldn't be designated until the night before. This was precision. This was inside information. Someone had sold out Vanguard to get to her, and 89 people had died as bait. She found the mortar position closest to the kill zone, signs of recent occupation clear in the disturbed earth and expended shells. Hidden behind a rock formation, probably missed by whoever was supposed to clean up evidence, she discovered a radio intercept device. Chinese military hardware, PRC Type 85, still running, still recording. The last transmission caught on its memory made her blood turn to ice water. White Phoenix is not with convoy. Repeat. White Phoenix not present. Do we abort? Different voice responding, measured and calm. Negative. Continue operation. Collateral damage is acceptable. White Phoenix will come to investigate. We take her then. Sarah looked across the killing field. 90 bodies. 89 of them collateral damage. Acceptable losses in someone's equation to capture or kill one target. Her radio crackled. She nearly shot it on instinct. Master Sergeant Brennan, this is Captain Webb. Thank God you're alive. We need you to return to base immediately for debriefing. The cartel got away, but we'll regroup and... Sarah listened to him lie. Listened to the voice from the transmission pretend concern. Pretend ignorance. Pretend he hadn't just orchestrated the murder of 90 soldiers to fulfill someone else's contract. Copy, she said, voice flat and empty, returning to base. She gathered the 90 sets of dog tags, hung them around her neck where they clinked together like wind chimes in a place where no wind should blow. Each one a name, each one a story, each one a debt that would be paid. The sun climbed higher, baking the desert, heating the blood that pooled in the sand and painted the rocks and marked the place where Vanguard Task Force had been sacrificed on the altar of someone's impossible choice. Sarah Kate Brennan, Master Sergeant, 48 years old, 2 years from mandatory retirement, walked away from the massacre with 90 ghosts at her back and a promise burning in her chest like white phosphorus. Someone had made a choice, had done the math, had decided 89 lives were acceptable payment for one target. Now she would make them understand that some math came with consequences. Some choices had costs that couldn't be calculated. Some debts could only be paid in blood and justice, in the particular patience of a woman who'd spent 28 years learning how to wait for the perfect shot. The hunt had begun, and Master Sergeant Sarah Kate Brennan had all the time in the world because dead people don't have schedules and ghosts don't sleep. And revenge is a language that transcends age and rank and retirement timelines. She touched the dog tags around her neck. 90 names, 90 stories, 90 reasons to become something the world hadn't seen in a long time. A reaper without mercy, a hunter without hesitation, an old soldier who understood that experience wasn't about knowing the right answer. It was about surviving long enough to ask the right questions. And the first question was simple. Who benefits when White Phoenix dies? The answer waited somewhere in the desert heat and classified transmissions, in the particular silence that follows mass murder. Sarah would find it. She had patience. She had skill. She had 28 years of training and 2 years left before the system threw her away. More than enough time to make sure those 90 deaths meant something. More than enough time to teach the world that old soldiers don't fade away. They just reload. The base at Fort Hood felt like a mausoleum dressed up as a military installation. Sarah Kate Brennan walked through corridors where people averted their eyes, offering condolences that sounded like prayers at a funeral for someone they never knew. 90 dog tags hung around her neck beneath her uniform, cold metal against skin that hadn't stopped sweating since the massacre 3 days ago. She'd showered twice daily, trying to wash away the smell of cordite and blood and burning flesh. But some stains went deeper than soap could reach. The debriefing lasted 6 hours. Officers she'd never met asking questions they already knew the answers to, filling forms that would be classified and buried and forgotten by everyone except the families who'd get folded flags and rehearsed speeches about sacrifice and service. Captain Marcus Webb sat in the corner throughout, face appropriately somber, voice respectfully quiet when they asked him to explain the intelligence failure. "Sir, the cartel changed their route at the last minute," Webb said, lying with the practiced ease of someone who'd been lying for years. "Our sources were solid, but the enemy adapted. It's the nature of asymmetric warfare. Sometimes we win, sometimes they do." Sarah watched him, studied the micro-expressions that most people missed. The slight relaxation around his eyes when he delivered the lie. The way his left hand touched his wedding ring 3 times during the testimony, a self-soothing gesture that psychologists said indicated stress, but liars used as an anchor point to ground their fabrications in something real. After the debriefing, Webb approached her in the parking lot, sunset painting the Texas sky in colors that reminded Sarah of fire and endings. "Master Sergeant, I'm so sorry for your loss. Losing Vanguard like that, watching it happen, and being unable to help, I can't imagine what you're going through." Sarah looked at him with eyes that had watched 89 people die while following his orders to remain in position. "Thank you, sir. I'm sure you did everything you could to prevent it." Something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe? Or the particular satisfaction of someone who'd gotten away with murder and just received confirmation that the witness bought the story. "If you need anything, counseling, family assistance, just let me know. Vanguard was important to me too." "I'll remember that, sir." She watched him drive away, memorizing the license plate, the make and model, the small crack in the rear windshield that made his vehicle identifiable in a crowd. 28 years in the military had taught her many things. One of them was how to hunt. But she wouldn't hunt like the young ones did, all computers and satellites and digital forensics that left trails for counterintelligence to follow. She'd hunt the way her father taught her, back when the world ran on paper and film and human intelligence instead of zeros and ones. The old ways, the patient ways, the ways that couldn't be traced because they existed in meat space instead of cyberspace. Agent Maria Torres found Sarah in a dive bar 40 miles from base, the kind of place where people paid in cash and bartenders didn't remember faces. Torres was 51 years old, former Army intelligence turned FBI counter-espionage, with the particular wariness of someone who'd seen too many betrayals to believe in much anymore. She and Sarah had served together in Iraq during the surge, holding a checkpoint outside Fallujah when car bombs were as common as sunrise and trust was the rarest currency in circulation. Torres slid into the booth without asking permission, set a manila folder on the scarred wood table. Not a tablet, not a phone, paper, physical documents that couldn't be hacked or traced or remotely wiped. "You're investigating your own unit," Torres said. Not a question, a statement delivered with the flat certainty of someone reading an obvious truth. "That's career suicide, Kate. They're already dead. Someone needs to speak for them. Torres pushed the folder across the table. Financial records, paper copies, no digital trail. I pulled them from archives, made photocopies on a machine that's not networked, in a building that doesn't have cameras. Whatever you're planning, I was never here. Sarah opened the folder. Bank statements, wire transfers, the particular paper trail that money leaves when it moves through the system. Captain Marcus Webb's finances were clean as expected. Spotless. The kind of spotless that came from careful management and careful lies. But his deceased wife's estate told a different story. Jessica Webb had died 3 years ago, cancer, leaving a trust fund worth $4.2 million. The money had been distributed in careful increments over 36 months to something called Border Angels Relief Foundation, a charity, registered, legal, untraceable once the money moved to offshore accounts 3 transactions later. Who runs Border Angels? Sarah asked. Nobody. It's a shell. Money goes in, disappears into accounts in the Caymans, then gone. Could be funding anything. Medical research, political campaigns, cartel operations. No way to know without subpoena and probable cause, neither of which we have. Sarah studied the documents with the careful attention of someone reading a language she'd learned to translate. 4.2 million over 3 years. Payments that coincided with major cartel operations in the border region. Payments that stopped 6 months ago when the money ran out. He's broke, Sarah said. Whatever he was funding, the well's dry. Or he found new funding. People don't stop being corrupt just because one revenue stream dries up. They find another. Sarah closed the folder, slid it back. I need you to forget we had this conversation. What conversation? Torres stood, paused at the booth's edge. Kate, you go down this road. There's no coming back. You'll lose your pension, probably your freedom, maybe your life. Is it worth it? Sarah touched the dog tags beneath her uniform. 90 names, 90 souls, 90 debts that compounded interest every hour they went unpaid. They were worth something when they were alive. I'm making sure they're worth something now that they're dead. The nightmares came every time she closed her eyes. Not the massacre itself, though, that played on repeat often enough. The dreams that woke her in sweat-soaked sheets were memories of when Vanguard was alive, when they were 90 people instead of 90 ghosts. She dreamed of poker night, Bull Rodriguez holding court with stories that grew more elaborate with each beer. He'd been telling the one about Mogadishu, the time his squad got pinned down in a marketplace, and he'd charged a machine gun nest armed with nothing but a broken rifle in what he called aggressive verbal negotiations. So I'm screaming at these guys in Spanish because I forgot I was in Somalia, and they're looking at me like I'm insane, which, fair point, and I just kept running because stopping meant dying, and I wasn't ready to die on a Tuesday. Preacher Williams had laughed, the deep rumbling kind that shook his whole frame. Bull, that story gets more embellished every time you tell it. Next time you'll be fighting a tank with a plastic spoon. The spoon comes later. That's the Fallujah story. Everyone had laughed. Everyone had been alive. Everyone had believed they were good enough, tough enough, prepared enough to come home. Sarah woke in the darkness of her barracks room, Bull's laughter echoing in her ears like artillery fire in the distance. She pulled out the photograph from the last night before deployment. 90 faces pressed together, smiling at futures that no longer existed. She traced her finger across each one, whispering names like prayers. Marcus Rodriguez, David Williams, Emma Kavanaugh, Rachel Voss, Casey Mitchell, Andre Washington, Robert Patterson, Linda Zhao, Felix Ortega, Dylan Cross, and 80 more. The first kill required patience measured in days rather than hours. Sarah tracked Ernesto Vega for 72 hours, learning his patterns the way a wolf learns the habits of deer. Vega was cartel muscle, the coordinator who'd positioned the mortar teams that murdered Vanguard. He moved through El Paso with the casual confidence of someone who believed the law couldn't touch him, which was technically accurate given the number of local officials on cartel payroll. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks insisted on accompanying her. The kid still believed in regulations and chain of command and doing things by the book. Sarah let him come because having a witness meant everything she did was technically sanctioned, and also because he needed to learn that sometimes the book got people killed. They set up in an abandoned building overlooking the shrine where Vega went every morning at 6 a.m. to light candles and pray for protection from the saint of death. Narco culture mixed Catholicism and folk magic into something that let men murder on Tuesday and seek forgiveness on Wednesday. Brooks arrived with equipment that looked like it cost more than Sarah's annual salary. Thermal optics, laser rangefinder, ballistic computer, wind sensor array. Everything modern warfare promised to make shooting easier, simpler, more like playing a video game than taking a human life. "Ma'am, I've got the target area mapped," Brooks said, studying his tablet screen. "Wind is variable, 3 to 7 miles per hour from the northeast. Thermal shows no other bodies in the building. Clean shot whenever you're ready." Sarah ignored the technology, set up her rifle the old way, using earth and stone and patience instead of computers. 1,400 meters to target. She placed her weathered hand in the air, felt wind kiss her palm, watched flags 3 blocks away to gauge how the air moved differently at street level versus rooftop level. Wind was never simple, never constant. Reading it required conversations with the earth that no computer could translate. "Computer says wind is 5 miles per hour, Brooks offered. "Computer's reading wind here. Not wind at 700 meters, not wind at the target, just here." "Ma'am, technology eliminates human error. Technology eliminates human judgment. There's a difference." She settled behind the rifle, breathing slow and controlled. Through the scope, she watched Vega's routine. The way he parked his car in the same spot every morning. How he touched the shrine 3 times before lighting candles. The moment he closed his eyes to pray. That was the shot, when his eyes closed, when he believed himself protected by saints and prayers in the particular faith that wicked men have in their own invincibility. Brooks fidgeted beside her. 45 minutes, an hour, 90 minutes. The kid's legs cramped from holding position. His focus wavered. He checked his phone twice, which would have gotten him killed in a real combat zone. "Ma'am, how much longer?" "Until it's right. The computer says we have optimal conditions now." The computer doesn't know that Vega's bodyguard is standing behind that pillar at his 7 o'clock. Computer doesn't see that the morning sun will shift in 12 minutes and give us glare that makes the shot impossible. Computer doesn't understand that patience is a weapon. At 6:47 a.m., everything aligned. Wind dropped to almost nothing. Bodyguard stepped away to smoke a cigarette. Vega closed his eyes and bowed his head in prayer. Sarah found that space between heartbeats where the world went perfectly still. Whispered a name. "Marcus Rodriguez." The rifle spoke once. 1,400 meters downrange, Ernesto Vega fell forward across the shrine. Candles scattering, prayers unanswered. Sarah left Bull's dog tag on the roof where local police would find it eventually. Let them wonder. Let them fear. Let the cartel know that someone was hunting them with the patience of old goss and the precision of new ones. Brooks stared through the spotting scope, then at Sarah, then back at the target like he was watching magic happen and couldn't find the trick. "How did you know about the bodyguard?" The thermal didn't show him. Thermal shows heat, doesn't show wisdom. "I knew about the bodyguard because I watched Vega for 3 days. I know he drinks coffee at 6:30. I know he touches the shrine 3 times. I know he closes his eyes for exactly 12 seconds when he prays. Technology tells you what is. Experience tells you what will be." They extracted clean, no pursuit, no witnesses who mattered. In the truck heading back to base, Brooks said, "Ma'am, that wasn't legal. We just assassinated a foreign national on U.S. soil without due process." "You're right. You want to report it?" Brooks gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, wrestling with the conscience that hadn't yet been beaten into submission by moral compromise. He was part of the team that killed 90 soldiers. "Yes. Does that make it right?" "No, but it makes it necessary. There's a difference." The visit to her father came that night. Colonel James Brennan sat in his room at the VA hospital, more lucid than he'd been in months. Like clarity came in inverse proportion to his daughter's descent into darkness. "You killed someone," he said when she entered. Not a question, a recognition of shared experience. "How do you know?" "Because you have the look, the one I had after Korea, after the first time I chose who lived and who died." He gestured to the chair beside his bed. "Sit. Let me tell you about impossible choices." Sarah sat, exhausted suddenly, the weight of 3 days without real sleep catching up to her adrenaline crash. 1952, North Korea. I was 22 years old, infantry officer, holding a position near the Chosin Reservoir. His voice took on the rhythm of old stories, worn smooth by repetition. "We had a North Korean defector, called himself Park, said he had information about Chinese troop movements. Intelligence officer wanted to bring him back for debriefing, but we were surrounded, couldn't move fast with a prisoner. What did you do? Commanding officer gave me the choice. Take Park and risk the whole platoon, or leave him and guarantee we'd make it to extraction. 40 men or 1 man, the math was simple. Sarah knew how this story ended, could read it in the way her father's hands shook slightly, tremor that had nothing to do with age. I chose the 40. We left Park behind, tied to a tree, with ammunition for 3 hours, enough to fight or enough to shoot himself when they came for him. Her father's eyes went distant. I heard the screaming start 2 hours later. Chinese interrogators, very thorough, very patient, very loud. You saved 40 men. I damned one. And myself, because I learned something that day, Katie girl. I learned I could make that kind of choice. Could look at human lives and do math with them like they were variables in an equation. Once you know you can do that, you can never unknow it. And people who need that kind of choice, they find you. They always find you. Sarah understood suddenly. The operators, they recruited you in Korea. Not recruited, identified. They watched to see who could make impossible choices without breaking, who could carry the weight. They found 8 of us over the years, built a network. We called ourselves insurance. The policy you hope never gets used but need in place when catastrophe strikes. What kind of catastrophes? Her father pulled an old photograph from his nightstand drawer. 5 men in civilian clothes, military bearing obvious despite the disguise. 1973, based on the clothing and hairstyles. Her father younger, harder, standing beside men she didn't recognize except one. Colonel James Hartford, her current commanding officer, looking 30 years younger but unmistakably the same man. We prevented things, her father said, sometimes by force, sometimes by information, sometimes by making choices that kept thousands alive at the cost of a few. Not legal, not moral, but necessary in the way that amputating a limb is necessary to save the body. Did you ever sacrifice Americans? The pause stretched too long, answer enough even before he spoke. Twice, once in Beirut, once in the first Gulf War. Both times the alternative was worse. Both times I've carried the weight every day since. Sarah felt the dog tags around her neck suddenly heavier. Vanguard, was that you? No, I voted against it, but I was outvoted. Democracy among the operators. 7-1. The mission went forward. Who ordered it to? Can't tell you that. Not because I'm protecting them. Because knowing makes you complicit, makes you part of the choice. Some weights you don't need to carry. Sarah stood, anger building like pressure in a sealed container. 90 people died. I watched them die. I followed orders to stay in position while they were slaughtered. And you're telling me it was planned? That someone in your network traded their lives for what? For math? For you? The words hit like artillery rounds. Sarah sat back down, legs suddenly unreliable. Her father's hand found hers, grip still strong despite age and tremor. Afghanistan, 2009. You killed 3 Chinese intelligence officers embedded with the Taliban. Made it look like they died in an airstrike, but Beijing knew. They knew and they wanted blood. Put $2 million bounty on White Phoenix. That's you, Katie. You were the target. Sarah remembered Afghanistan, remembered the mission. 3 men in Taliban camp who seemed wrong, who gave orders in accented Pashto, who had equipment too sophisticated for local insurgents. She'd taken the shots at 1,800 meters. Clean kills. Mission success. Never knew she'd started an international incident. The Chinese contacted me 6 months later, her father continued. Said the bounty would be withdrawn if I provided certain information. Intelligence assessments, troop movements, the kind of details that seemed harmless individually but built into something useful collectively. I refused. They said, fine, bounty stands, your daughter dies within the year. So you became a traitor. I became a father choosing his child over his country. Same choice I made leaving Park in Korea. Same choice I've made every time they've called. I gave them information, not much, not enough to get anyone killed directly, but enough to keep you safe, enough to make the bounty go away. Sarah pulled her hand back. For 13 years, you've been feeding intelligence to China for 13 years. To keep you alive, yes. And Vanguard? How does that connect? Her father's expression collapsed into something between grief and resignation. 3 weeks ago, China reactivated the bounty, said the original protection deal was void. They wanted White Phoenix delivered, or they'd take you themselves. The operators had a choice. refuse and lose their leverage with Chinese intelligence, which we've used to prevent God knows how many catastrophes, or cooperate and hand you over. Sarah stood again, pacing the small room like a caged animal looking for escape routes. They chose to hand me over. They chose to give China what they wanted while minimizing casualties. The plan was surgical. You'd be positioned separately. Overwatch. When the ambush happened, special teams would extract you before you knew what was happening. Clean, simple. One person traded for continued access to Chinese intelligence networks that save American lives. What went wrong? You did. You're too good, Katie, too aware. They couldn't get to you on the ridge without you noticing. So they had to wait for you to come down, had to let the massacre play out to draw you in. 89 people. Acceptable collateral damage in their math. One target, 89 witnesses who couldn't be left alive anyway once the operation was compromised. Sarah felt bile rising, swallowed it, focused on breathing. Who pulled the trigger on that decision? Marcus Webb coordinated it. He's Operator 12, newest member, recruited 2 years ago. But the vote to proceed was democratic. 7 operators voted yes, I voted no. I'm the only one who voted to refuse China and let the chips fall. Because I'm your daughter. Because I'm tired of making impossible choices and calling them noble. Because I wanted to choose right for once, even if right meant losing. Webb convinced the others that losing Chinese intelligence access would cost American lives. Made it about math again. 89 versus thousands potentially saved by continued cooperation with Beijing. Democracy voted for math. Sarah walked to the window, stared at parking lot lights that turned everything orange and artificial. Her whole world had been orange and artificial, built on lies and compromises and old men playing God with other people's lives. The Chinese transmission I found, the one saying I wasn't with the convoy, they sounded surprised, like it wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't. Webb changed the plan at the last minute. Told China you'd be with the main convoy. Probably figured if you died in the initial assault, problem solved cleanly. When you weren't there, China's team had to improvise. Decided collateral damage was acceptable and proceeded anyway. Webb tried to get me killed. Webb is a zealot, believes in the operator's mission absolutely, sees individuals as numbers in equations. He would have sacrificed you cleanly to maintain Chinese cooperation. When that failed, he let it turn into a massacre because the alternative was admitting failure. Sarah turned from the window. Where do I find the other operators? You don't. You walk away, you grieve, you move on, you let this go. Like you let Park go. How'd that work out for your conscience? Her father flinched. Direct hit. I'm trying to protect you. You've been protecting me for 13 years and it got 90 people killed. Maybe it's time to stop protecting me and start trusting me to protect myself. They'll kill you, Katie. The operators have resources you can't imagine. Connections at every level. You go after them, you won't make it a week. Then I better work fast. Sarah found Agent Thomas Cordova 3 days later at a casino in Las Cruces, drunk on watered-down whiskey and his own sense of invincibility. Cordova was Drug Enforcement Administration, 42 years old, 20 years in service, and according to Torres's investigation, the corrupt agent who'd provided China with Vanguard's convoy route after Webb fed him the information. The middleman, the transmission belt between traders. Sarah waited until Cordova stumbled to the parking garage, 3 a.m., alone, vulnerable in the way drunk men always are when they believe themselves safe. She'd learned over 72 hours of surveillance that Cordova carried a weapon even when intoxicated, that he'd killed 2 people in his career and enjoyed it, that he took payoffs from cartels in China and anyone else willing to pay for access to DEA intelligence. He was a professional survivor, knew how to watch his back, knew how to spot tails. But he didn't know how to spot a 48-year-old woman cleaning the parking garage floor at 3 a.m. because nobody notices custodians. Nobody sees the invisible labor that keeps the world running. Sarah followed him to his car, mop bucket rattling on wheels, just another anonymous worker finishing the graveyard shift. Cordova's hand went to his weapon when he heard footsteps. Relaxed when he saw an older woman in a maintenance uniform. Garage is closed for cleaning, Sarah said, accent roughened to disguise her voice. I just need to get to my car. Elevators are off for another hour, safety protocol. Cordova swayed, alcohol slowing his reaction time just enough. I'll take the stairs. Stairs are that way, Sarah pointed with the mop handle. He turned to look. Fatal mistake. Gave her his back. Gave her the opening. Sarah moved with speed that 28 years of hand-to-hand combat training provided, muscle memory faster than conscious thought. The mop handle swung hard into the back of his knees. He dropped. Before he could recover, she had his weapon, his car keys, his phone. Cordova looked up from the concrete, confusion turning to recognition, turning to fear, as Sarah removed the maintenance worker's cap and let him see her face. Master Sergeant Brennan, I heard you survived. Lucky. 90 people weren't. You helped make sure of that. I don't know what you're talking about. Sarah crouched beside him, close enough to smell the whiskey on his breath and the particular sweat of a guilty man realizing his luck had run out. You provided convoy routes to Chinese intelligence. Webb fed you the information. You passed it along for money. How much? What's the going rate for 90 American lives? You can't prove anything. I don't need to prove anything. I'm not a cop. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not interested in justice from a courtroom. She pulled out Gunny Patterson's dog tag, let it hang in the space between them. I'm interested in accounts being settled, debts being paid, old-fashioned arithmetic where you take 90 lives, you forfeit one. Cordova's hand moved toward his backup weapon. Sarah's hand moved faster. The combat knife she'd carried for 28 years suddenly pressed against his throat, hard enough to draw blood. Don't! You kill me, you'll never know the truth. Webb isn't the top. He's a puppet. There's someone else pulling his strings. Someone who benefits when both sides die. Then tell me who. Cordova laughed, bitter and wet. Your father, Colonel James Brennan. He's been running this network for 40 years. Webb works for him. We all work for him. The massacre was his idea, his plan, his choice. Sarah pressed the knife deeper. You're lying. Am I? Ask him about Beirut. Ask him about the Marines who died in the barracks bombing. Ask him who provided intelligence that pulled security details away at exactly the right time. Ask him how many Americans he sacrificed to keep his network running. He voted against Vanguard. He told you that. Did you verify it? Did you check the actual vote? Or did you just believe your father because good daughters believe their daddies even when their daddies are monsters? The knife shook in Sarah's hand, not from weakness, from rage so pure it threatened to crack her teeth. Last chance, who else is in the network? Go to hell, old woman. Sarah pulled the blade across his throat. Quick, clean, arterial spray painting the concrete. Cordova's eyes went wide with surprise that never faded, locked open in permanent shock as he bled out in 90 seconds that felt like hours. She left Bull Rodriguez's dog tag on his chest, washed her hands in the maintenance bucket, walked out of the parking garage wearing the uniform that made her invisible, just another custodian finishing her shift while a corrupt agent bled out 3 levels down. The drive back to Austin took 4 hours. Sarah made it in 3, pushing the speed limit and her luck in the particular recklessness of someone who'd crossed a line and couldn't see the way back. She found her father in the hospital's common room, playing chess with another veteran, the 2 old men moving pieces with trembling hands while discussing Korean war battles like they were yesterday instead of 70 years past. Katie, girl, her father said when he saw her, didn't expect you tonight. We need to talk, alone. In his room, door closed, Sarah confronted the man who'd raised her and ruined her and maybe saved her and definitely sacrificed 90 people in equations she didn't understand. Cordova said you were the one who ordered the Vanguard massacre. Said you run the whole network. Said you've been trading American lives for intelligence leverage for 40 years. Her father met her eyes, didn't flinch, didn't deny. Thomas Cordova was a liar and a traitor who sold information to the highest bidder. You killed him, I'm guessing. And now you're here asking me if his last words were truth. Were they? Some of them. I do run the network. Founded it, actually, 1953, after Korea taught me someone needed to make decisions that couldn't be official. Recruited 7 others over the years. Built something that's prevented more catastrophes than you can imagine. And Vanguard? I voted against it. That part was true. But I'm also the one who gave Webb the intelligence that made the operation possible. Gave him your position, your route, your comm frequencies. Everything he needed to coordinate with the Chinese. Sarah sat down hard. Why? Because if I didn't, he would have found another way. Webb is obsessed, sees the operators as sacred duty. If I'd refused, he would have gone rogue, used his own resources, and it would have been messier. More casualties, less control. By feeding him information, I could at least limit the damage. Limit the damage. 89 people died. Yes, and if I'd done nothing, 200 would have died when Webb's rogue operation spiraled out of control. I chose the smaller evil. I always choose the smaller evil. It's what I do. It's who I am. You told me you voted against it. I did. Then I helped make it happen. Both things are true. I can hate a decision and still execute it. I can vote no and still provide support when democracy overrules me. That's what being an operator means. Sometimes you're complicit in your own defeat. Sarah stood, walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the handle. Cordova's last words. He said, ask you about Beirut, about Marines dying in a barracks bombing. Her father's silence was confession enough. How many, Dad? How many Americans have you killed? I don't kill Americans, Katie. I make choices that result in Americans dying. There's a difference. Is there? Yes, intent matters. Means matter. I've never wanted anyone to die. I've only ever chosen the path that kills fewer instead of more. Sometimes that's still a lot. Sometimes the math is cruel, but it's still math, still logical, still the right choice even when it destroys you to make it. Sarah opened the door. I loved you. My whole life I loved you. Thought you were a hero. Thought you represented everything good about service and sacrifice and duty. I know. You're not a hero. You're a murderer with a calculator. Yes. And I'm going to stop you. Going to expose all of you. Going to make sure everyone knows what the operators are and what you've done. Her father nodded slowly, accepting. I know. I've always known that someday it would be you, the one person I couldn't calculate around, the one variable that breaks all my equations. I'm proud of you, Katie girl, for being better than me, for choosing right even when right is hard. Don't be proud. Don't try to make this noble. You killed 90 people. You killed my friends. You killed the only family I had left after you made me choose between service and everything else. I know, and I'm sorry for all of it, for every choice I made that hurt you, for being the father you needed and the monster you never deserved, for teaching you to be a soldier so good that the only way to stop you is to let you destroy me. Sarah walked out. Behind her, her father whispered something too quiet to hear, but she knew anyway. Knew because she'd heard him say it her whole life whenever she deployed, whenever she went into danger, whenever she walked into the dark. Come home safe, Katie girl. Always come home safe. She drove through the night, 90 dog tags clinking around her neck like a rosary of the damned, heading back to Fort Hood, where Agent Torres waited with more intelligence and more proof and more evidence of the network that had made her father into a monster and her country into something she didn't recognize. Behind her in the hospital, Colonel James Brennan sat alone in his room, holding a photograph of his daughter at her commissioning ceremony 28 years ago, so young and proud and certain that serving meant something pure. He tried to protect her, tried to keep her safe, tried to make impossible choices so she'd never have to. And all he'd done was guarantee that eventually she'd have to choose between him and everything he'd taught her to believe in. Some choices he'd learned in 76 years weren't impossible at all. Some were just inevitable. And the only thing left was accepting what came next. Sarah Kate Brennan spent 2 days in a motel room 40 miles from anywhere that mattered, staring at water stains on the ceiling and trying to remember who she'd been before the massacre, before she became a killer, before her father revealed himself as the architect of atrocity dressed in the language of necessity. The 90 dog tags lay spread across the cheap bedspread, arranged in rows like graves, each one a name she whispered in the darkness when sleep refused to come. Preacher Williams had asked her once, during one of those late-night conversations when guard duty turned philosophical, how she lived with taking lives. She told him about the chain of command, about trust in the mission, about believing that someone higher up had done the moral calculations and decided that her trigger pull served the greater good. Preacher had smiled that knowing smile of his and said sometimes the chain of command was just a long line of people passing the weight until it crushed whoever stood at the end. She understood now. She was the end of the chain, the one holding weight that couldn't be passed anywhere else, the one who'd have to decide if her father was a monster or a martyr, if the operators were saviors or murderers, if 90 deaths purchased something worth the price or just proved that evil could do math. Agent Maria Torres found her on the third day, knocked twice and entered when Sarah didn't answer, carrying coffee and the grim expression of someone delivering bad news that couldn't wait. They know you're hunting them, Torres said, setting the coffee on the nightstand like an offering to grief. Webb put out feelers. Cordova's death got their attention. They're moving the network underground, changing protocols. We've got maybe 48 hours before they disappear so deep you'll never find them. Sarah sat up, bones protesting, muscles stiff from 2 days of stillness. Where are they? New Mexico, remote ranch, 100 miles from anything. 8 of them gathering for emergency session. Your father, Hartford Webb, 5 others. They're voting on how to handle you. Voting on whether to kill me. Probably. Democracy among sociopaths. Very civilized. Torres pulled a file from her jacket. More paper, more analog intelligence in a digital age. I can't go with you on this. FBI can't sanction what you're planning. But I can give you coordinates. Give you 48 hours head start before I have to report what I know. Why help me? Torres met her eyes and Sarah saw the weight there, the particular burden of someone who'd served long enough to know the gap between what's legal and what's right. Because I was in Fallujah when you held that checkpoint for 16 hours. Because you saved my life 3 times and never mentioned it. Because sometimes the system is broken and the only way to fix it is to break it further and hope the pieces fall into something better. The coordinates led to a place that existed on no commercial map, accessible only by dirt roads that turned to mud when it rained and dust when it didn't. Sarah approached on foot, leaving her vehicle 5 miles back, moving through New Mexico scrubland with the patience of someone who'd spent 28 years learning how to become landscape. The ranch house sat in a valley like something from a Western film, all weathered wood and rusted metal, in the particular desolation of places built by optimists and abandoned by realists. 3 vehicles parked outside. Guards at perimeter points, professional but not expecting serious threat. The operators had grown comfortable. Decades of operating in shadows made them forget that sometimes shadows birthed hunters. Sarah waited until dusk, that golden hour when light failed, but darkness hadn't committed. When the human eye struggled with transitions and depth perception became guesswork. She moved through the guard rotation, close enough to hear their breathing, far enough to remain invisible. 28 years of experience versus their 15 or 20. Age and patience versus youth and confidence. The guards never saw her. Never knew she'd passed within 10 feet of their positions. Never realized death had walked among them and chosen mercy because she needed them alive as witnesses to what came next. Inside the ranch house, 8 voices argued with the particular intensity of people who'd spent lifetimes making impossible choices and recently discovered that maybe their choices had created more problems than solutions. Sarah positioned herself outside the main room's window, listening through glass that hadn't been washed in decades. She's killed 2 of our assets in 4 days, a voice said. Not Webb, older, authoritative. Vega and Cordova both found with dog tags from Vanguard. She's sending a message. Let her send messages, another voice responded. She's one woman, 48 years old, 2 years from mandatory retirement. She's angry and grieving, but she's not a real threat to the network. Colonel James Hartford spoke next, his voice carrying the gravel of command and cigarettes. You're underestimating her. I've watched Kate Brennan operate for 15 years. She's the most patient sniper I've ever seen. Held position 11 hours in Kandahar without moving. Made a shot at 2,800 meters in wind that would have defeated anyone else. She's not acting on emotion. She's hunting with purpose. Then we eliminate the threat, Webb said, his voice tight with the particular stress of someone whose plans kept failing. Sanction her. Make it look like cartel retaliation for Vega. Clean, final. Sarah's father spoke, and she pressed closer to the window to hear. You sanction my daughter and I walk. Take everything I know to DOD Inspector General. Burn this whole network to bedrock. You helped create Vanguard Operation, Webb shot back. You're as complicit as any of us. More because you gave me the intelligence while voting against the mission. You wanted it both ways, moral high ground and operational success. Can't have both, Colonel. I know what I am. I have known for 40 years. But I won't let you kill Katie. We find another solution. A woman's voice entered the conversation, older than Sarah, carrying authority that didn't need volume. The solution is conversation. Brennan's daughter deserves to know why Vanguard died. Deserves to understand the choice we made. Maybe she'll agree. Maybe she won't. But she's earned the right to hear it directly. That's naive, Helen, Webb said. She's killed 2 people. She's not interested in dialogue. She killed 2 people who participated in murdering 90 of her friends. That's not murder. That's battlefield justice. Crude but comprehensible. We bring her in. We explain. We let her decide if we're monsters or necessary evils. Democracy, Marcus, the thing we supposedly believe in. Silence stretched while 8 people who'd made careers of impossible decisions struggled with one more. Finally, Hartford spoke. I'll contact her, arrange a meet, neutral ground, no weapons, just talk. She won't come, Webb said. She will, Sarah's father replied, because she's my daughter and she needs to know if I'm worth hating or worth understanding. She'll come. Sarah stepped through the door before anyone could move, before guards could react, before the operators could process that their security had been theater, and she'd been audience to their entire debate. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward her, hands moving toward weapons that Sarah's presence made irrelevant because she held her rifle casually, pointed at nothing, a statement of capability rather than intent. Saved you the phone call, Sarah said, meeting her father's eyes across the room. Let's talk. They gathered around a table that had seen better decades. 8 people who'd shaped American foreign policy from shadows, and 1 woman who'd become their reckoning. Colonel James Brennan sat at one end, looking older than his 76 years, bearing the weight of choices that aged you faster than time. Colonel James Hartford sat opposite, 58 years old, career officer, Sarah's commanding officer, revealed now as Operator 3. Captain Marcus Webb, 39, logistics coordinator. Operator 12, the zealot who believed math justified anything. 5 others Sarah didn't know. A woman in her 70s with steel gray hair and eyes like frozen lakes, who Hartford introduced as Helen Yu, former CIA Special Activities Division Chief. Operator 5. A retired general named Frank Morrison, 72 years old, decorated veteran of Grenada and Panama. Operator 2. 3 others, all military or intelligence backgrounds, all between 60 and 75, all carrying the particular weariness of people who'd spent lifetimes in moral gray zones. General Parson spoke first, voice like gravel in a cement mixer. Master Sergeant Brennan, you've killed 2 of our intelligence assets and compromised operations we've been building for years. You deserve an explanation before we decide how this ends. Generous of you, Sarah said, not sitting, maintaining tactical advantage of mobility. Let me guess, you're going to tell me Vanguard's massacre was necessary, that 90 deaths prevented something worse, that you did the math and the equation balanced. Not balanced, Helen Yu said quietly. Math never balances when you're counting human lives, but sometimes subtraction on one side prevents multiplication on the other. Vanguard died to stop something that would have killed thousands. That's not balance. That's triage. Webb pulled out a tablet, displayed classified intelligence that Sarah shouldn't see, and didn't care about legal niceties anymore. Satellite imagery of military installations across the southwestern United States. 12 bases, hundreds of buildings, thousands of personnel and families. 3 months ago, Chinese intelligence coordinated with domestic terror cells to plan simultaneous truck bomb attacks on these 12 locations, Webb said, finger tracing the targets. C-4 military-grade explosive, 500 kilograms per truck. Coordinated detonation during shift changes when maximum personnel would be vulnerable. Conservative casualty estimate, 2,000 dead, 3,000 wounded. Catastrophic damage to readiness and morale. Sarah studied the images. Fort Hood, Fort Bliss, Marine Corps Air Station Yuma, Naval Base San Diego. Targets that would have devastated military families and gutted operational capacity for months. Chinese MSS wanted something in exchange for intelligence on the operation, Hartford continued. They wanted White Phoenix, wanted you. The bounty from 2009 was never really withdrawn, just converted from monetary to intelligence leverage. They'd give us the terror cell locations and timelines if we gave them you. So you traded me for the intelligence, Sarah said. We traded the appearance of cooperation, her father replied. We let them think we'd hand you over. Set up Vanguard intercept knowing they'd take the bait. Positioned you separately as Overwatch, planning to extract you before Chinese teams could get close. The convoy ambush was supposed to be theater. Smoke and noise to convince Beijing we'd tried to deliver but you'd escaped. What went wrong? Webb didn't meet her eyes. I changed the plan, told Chinese intelligence you'd be with the main convoy. Thought if you died in the initial assault, it solved multiple problems. Eliminated you as leverage point against your father. Gave China what they wanted. Maintained our intelligence access. You tried to have me killed. I tried to make a clean trade. One target for information that saved thousands. When you weren't with the convoy, Chinese teams should have aborted, should have pulled back. But they'd invested too heavily in the operation, decided collateral damage was acceptable, proceeded with full assault. 89 collateral damage. Yes, Sarah breathed slowly, counting heartbeats, finding that space between rage and action where decisions got made. And the terror attack, you stopped it? Morrison nodded. Intelligence led us to 11 of 12 cells, neutralized them, disrupted timeline, forced postponement that gave us time to identify the 12th cell. Operation was dismantled, 2,000 lives saved. Cost was Vanguard. Cost was 90 people who trusted you, who served honorably, who believed the chain of command had their backs. Yes, Helen Yu said simply. That's the cost. That's always the cost. Someone's trust, someone's life, someone's soul. We've been paying it for 40 years. We're tired, Sergeant Brennan. So tired. But the alternative is letting catastrophes happen because we're afraid to make hard choices. Sarah walked to the window, stared at scrubland painted orange by setting sun, tried to find words for the knot in her chest that felt like grief and fury and something else she couldn't name. You could have told Vanguard, could have given them the choice. Let them vote on whether they were willing to die to stop the attack. And if they voted no, Webb asked, if they chose self-preservation over mission, then what? We let 2,000 people die because 90 chose not to sacrifice? Yes, because those 90 earned the right to choose. Because consent matters. Because the moment you take that choice away, you're not soldiers anymore. You're tyrants with better math. Her father stood, moved to stand beside her at the window. Katie, I've spent 40 years making choices other people couldn't make, carrying weight that would have broken anyone else. I've damned myself 1,000 times over thinking I was saving the world. Maybe I was. Maybe I just convinced myself that murder becomes noble if you feel bad enough about it afterward. You voted against Vanguard. I voted against it, then helped execute it. Both things are true. I can hate a choice and still participate when democracy overrules me. That's what being an operator means. Sometimes you're complicit in your own moral defeat. Sarah turned from the window, faced 8 people who looked like grandparents and accountants and retired officers. Normal people who'd done abnormal things for so long, they'd forgotten where duty ended and atrocity began. Captain Rachel Voss, Sarah said, intelligence analyst, 28 years old, brilliant, thorough. She was investigating anomalies in cartel patterns before Vanguard deployed, found connections she couldn't explain, was writing a report. What happened to that report? Hartford and her father exchanged glances, the kind of look that said they'd hoped this particular subject wouldn't surface. The report was classified after her death, Hartford said carefully, deemed non-essential to operational review. Let me see it. It's classified. So is this meeting. So is everything you've told me tonight. Let me see what Rachel found, or I walk out of here and spend the next 2 years destroying everything you've built. Morrison pulled a laptop from a bag beneath the table, typed passwords and commands, pulled up files that made Sarah's skin go cold before she'd read the first line. Rachel's investigation, 3 months of work. Pattern analysis showing that cartel operations weren't random chaos, but coordinated movements orchestrated by someone with access to U.S. military intelligence. Someone who knew deployment schedules and convoy routes and security rotations. Someone inside the system feeding information to cartels while pretending to fight them. But the report went deeper. Rachel had identified financial transactions, money moving through shell corporations, payments to offshore accounts, and a list of names, officers who'd received unexplained deposits, who'd made purchases beyond their pay grade, who'd retired early with suspiciously large nest eggs. The list included 3 of the operators in this room, including Sarah's father. She knew, Sarah whispered. Rachel knew you were corrupt. She was building a case. She knew there was corruption, Hartford said. She didn't know about the operators. Didn't understand that the money wasn't payment for betraying America. It was payment for preventing worse betrayals. We take money from cartels, from foreign intelligence, from anyone willing to pay. Then we use that money to fund operations that can't be official. Black sites, interrogations, sanctions, the things Congress can't authorize but still need done. You're criminals funding illegal operations with illegal money. Yes, Helen Yu said, and we've prevented 17 terror attacks, dismantled 6 trafficking networks, eliminated 32 clear and present dangers to national security, all with money that came from criminals and went to stopping greater crimes. Dirty means clean ends. It doesn't make us noble, but it makes us necessary. Sarah scrolled through Rachel's report, seeing her analyst's mind at work, following threads that would have eventually led to the operators if she'd lived long enough to pull them. She would have exposed you. Eventually, Webb said, which is why her assignment to Vanguard was convenient. We didn't select her for the unit, that was random. But when we realized she'd be part of the operation, we didn't object. Her death eliminated a problem. The words hung in air, gone suddenly toxic. Sarah's hands trembled on the laptop. You murdered her specifically, not collateral damage. Target. No, her father said, voice sharp. I specifically argued to pull her from Vanguard. Voted to scrub the mission entirely when I learned she'd be involved. I was overruled. By who? By me, Morrison said. By the vote. 5 operators said proceed, 3 said abort. Democracy decided Rachel Voss's investigation was threat enough to justify her elimination as part of the larger operation. Sarah closed the laptop with hands that wanted to become fists, become weapons, become the violence burning in her chest like white phosphorus. She was 28 years old, brilliant, had her whole life ahead of her, and you killed her to cover your crimes. We killed her to protect operations that save lives, Webb said. Sometimes the equation requires sacrificing the good to preserve the greater good. It's ugly math, but it's still math. She was my daughter. The room went silent. 8 operators staring at Sarah like she'd spoken in tongues. Her father's face collapsed into something between recognition and devastation. What? He whispered. 28 years ago, I was 20. Deployed to Bosnia, got pregnant by a fellow soldier who disappeared when he found out. I gave the baby up for adoption. Girl. Named her Rachel before the family took her. Kept tabs on her through unofficial channels. Watched her grow up. Watched her join the army. Watched her become exactly the kind of officer I'd always hoped to be. Sarah's voice cracked, but she forced the words out, made them real by speaking them into existence. She was assigned to Vanguard. I requested her specifically as my intelligence analyst. Wanted to work with her, protect her, maybe eventually tell her who I was. But I thought I had time. Thought we'd deploy, come home, and I'd find the right moment to say Katie Brennan from the adoption papers is Master Sergeant Sarah Brennan, and I'm your mother. She met her father's eyes across the table. You didn't just kill 90 soldiers. You killed my daughter, your granddaughter, and you did it with math. James Brennan aged a decade in the seconds after that revelation. Hands shaking as he reached for Sarah, stopping when she pulled away. Katie, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. You monitored her whole life, Sarah said. Watched her, probably influenced her military career, made sure she succeeded, and you never told me. Never thought maybe I deserved to know my daughter was alive and thriving and becoming everything I'd hoped. I was protecting her, and you. Adoption records were sealed. I kept them sealed. Thought if you knew, you'd try to contact her. Would have complicated her life, given her questions she didn't need. You took that choice from me, just like you take every choice. Because you think you know better. Think your math is wisdom instead of cowardice. Webb stood, hand moving toward his weapon. This changes nothing. Rachel Voss was an acceptable loss in service of the mission. Personal relationships don't alter the calculation. Sarah moved faster than Webb, faster than the other operators could track. 28 years of combat reflexes against his 15. She had his weapon before he'd cleared the holster, had him on the ground with the gun to his temple before anyone else could draw. Say it again, Sarah hissed. Tell me my daughter was acceptable loss. Give me an excuse. Kate, her father said, hands raised, voice carrying 40 years of command presence. Don't. You kill him. You become what he is. You prove him right. That violence is answer. That math justifies anything. He murdered Rachel. We all murdered Rachel. The vote was democratic. We're all complicit. You want justice, you take us all. But you don't execute one man and call it righteous. Sarah held the gun steady, feeling Webb's pulse through the barrel pressed to his skull, feeling the weight of 91 deaths demanding payment. 90 soldiers and 1 daughter. 91 reasons to pull the trigger and let math solve itself. But pulling the trigger made her them. Made her an operator who did arithmetic with human lives and called the sum acceptable. She released Webb, threw the weapon across the room, stepped back before the rage in her chest could override the discipline in her spine. I'm going to destroy you, Sarah said to the room. All of you. I'm going to expose the operators to every oversight committee and inspector general and journalist who'll listen. I'm going to make sure the world knows what you've done, what you are, and I'm going to make sure every family of every soldier you've sacrificed gets to know that their loved ones died not for mission, but for your moral cowardice. You'll destroy 40 years of operations that saved thousands, Morrison said. Good. Because those operations were built on crimes, on betrayals, on the kind of thinking that turns soldiers into commodities and calls it strategy. You want to stop terror attacks? Do it legally. Do it honorably. Do it in the light where Congress and courts can provide oversight. You don't get to play God in the shadows and expect thanks for it. Helen Yu spoke quietly, voice heavy with something like regret. What if we told you there's another operation planned, bigger than Vanguard, 340 service members at risk, Syrian forward operating base about to be sacrificed to stop Iranian nuclear program? Same math, same impossible choice. Would you stop us from preventing it? Yes, Sarah said without hesitation. I'd stop you, and then I'd find the third way. The one you're too tired and corrupt and lazy to look for. Because there's always a third way. You've just convinced yourselves there isn't, so you don't have to carry the weight of finding it. She walked toward the door, stopped at the threshold. You have 72 hours. After that, I start making calls. Start sending files. Start burning everything you've built to bedrock. If you try to stop me, I'll make sure the evidence goes public automatically. If you try to kill me, same result. Your only move is to accept that the operators are done. Kate, her father called, please let me explain. Let me help you understand. I understand perfectly, Dad. You're a good man who made terrible choices and convinced himself the choices were good because the alternative was admitting you'd become a monster. I understand that. I even forgive it. But I won't enable it. Not anymore. She left 8 operators sitting in silence, processing the end of something they'd built over 40 years and probably believed was eternal. Outside, dusk had surrendered to darkness, stars emerging like puncture wounds in the fabric of night. Sarah walked back toward her vehicle, 91 names burning in her chest, 91 debts still demanding payment. But something felt wrong. The guards had been at the perimeter positions, should have intercepted her on exit, should have at least challenged her departure. She found the first guard unconscious near the northern fence line, zip-tied, gagged, professionally neutralized by someone who knew how to disable without killing. The second guard was the same. Third, fourth. Someone else was here. Someone who'd moved through the security net even more efficiently than Sarah had. Someone who wanted the operators vulnerable. Sarah heard the first explosion before she saw the flash. The ranch house erupting in fire and concussion, wood and glass and burning fuel painting the desert night orange and terrible. She ran back toward the building, but the heat drove her away, flames consuming everything, turning the meeting place into a funeral pyre. 8 operators inside, 8 people who'd made terrible choices for arguably noble reasons. 8 monsters or martyrs depending on perspective. All dead now, burned alive while Sarah walked away thinking she'd won. She searched the perimeter for whoever had planted the explosives, found tire tracks leading away from the property. Recent, deep treads suggesting a heavy vehicle moving fast. Whoever had done this was already miles gone, leaving Sarah standing in front of an inferno that contained her father's body and 7 others who'd taken their secrets to ashes. Her satellite phone buzzed, text message from unknown number. The operators are dead, but the operation continues. Syrian FOB will be sacrificed in 72 hours. 340 souls. Stop me if you can. Operator 12. Webb. Marcus Webb had escaped. Had probably never been in the building. Had set the charges before the meeting. Had eliminated his fellow operators and left Sarah standing there looking like the killer. A second message followed. Your daughter knew. Check her tablet. Password is her mother's first deployment. She left you everything. Time to choose, Master Sergeant. Save 340 or chase ghosts. You can't do both. Clock's running. Sarah stood in the firelight, feeling heat that couldn't warm the cold spreading through her chest. Her father was dead. The operators were dead. Webb was running loose with a plan to sacrifice 340 soldiers. And somewhere in Rachel's personal effects was evidence that her daughter had known exactly who Sarah was and had chosen not to reveal it. 91 names, 340 more about to join them, and Sarah Kate Brennan standing at the intersection of revenge and duty, facing the same impossible choice the operators had faced for 40 years. Save the many or honor the few. Do the math or reject the equation. Become what she'd hunted or find that third way she'd promised existed. Behind her, the ranch house collapsed into itself, flames reaching toward stars that offered no guidance, only witness to the particular hell humans made when they tried to play God with calculators instead of conscience. The choice waited in the darkness ahead, and the clock was running. The smoke from the burning ranch house followed Sarah Kate Brennan for 40 miles, visible in her rearview mirror like a funeral pyre marking where her father had died and the operators had ended. And Marcus Webb had proven that zealots were more dangerous than networks because networks had accountability and zealots only had conviction. She pulled over twice to vomit, body rejecting the reality her mind couldn't process. Then drove on through New Mexico, darkness toward a storage unit in Albuquerque, where Rachel Voss's personal effects waited in a metal box smaller than a coffin. The facility was the kind of place where people stored lives they couldn't carry anymore. Furniture from failed marriages, photographs from better times, the accumulated weight of existence that didn't fit in apartments or hearts. Sarah used the key Agent Torres had provided, opened Unit 247, found 3 cardboard boxes labeled with Rachel's name and service number, and the particular bureaucracy that reduced human lives to inventory. Box 1 held uniforms and boots and the gear that made a soldier. Box 2 contained photographs in letters and small mementos that made a person. Box 3 held electronics, laptop, external drives, and a tablet in a waterproof case with a note taped to the screen in handwriting Sarah recognized from intelligence reports she'd reviewed 100 times. The note read, "For Master Sergeant Sarah Brennan, if you're reading this, I'm dead and you're looking for answers. The password is the place where you began your military career. The place where you learned to be who you are. I've always known who you were. I just wanted you to know me as a soldier first, as someone you could be proud of. I hope I earned that. Your daughter, Rachel." Sarah's hands shook, holding the tablet. The password field waited like a test she couldn't fail. Bosnia deployment. First station. First combat. First time she'd killed someone and learned that taking life was easy, but living with it was the hard part. She typed the answer, hands steady now, despite the tremor in her chest, and the tablet unlocked. Files organized with military precision. Intelligence reports Rachel had compiled investigating the operators. Financial records showing money flows from cartels through shell corporations to offshore accounts. Names and dates in the particular paper trail that corruption always left because criminals were arrogant enough to think themselves untouchable. But deeper in the directory, Sarah found a folder labeled Mom. Inside were photographs Sarah had never seen, her own service photos downloaded from military databases. News articles about her sniper record. Award ceremonies where Sarah stood at attention receiving commendations. Rachel had been watching her, studying her, building a profile of the mother who'd given her up and the soldier that mother had become. A video file sat at the bottom of the folder, dated 3 days before Vanguard deployed. Sarah pressed play, and Rachel's face filled the screen, alive and vital and heartbreakingly young. 28 years old, the same age Sarah had been when she'd given birth and made the hardest choice of her life. "Hi, Mom," Rachel said to the camera, to Sarah, to the future where she knew she might not survive to deliver this message in person. "I'm making this just in case the intelligence I'm gathering gets me killed. Just in case the people I'm investigating decide I know too much. Just in case you need to understand what I discovered and why it matters." Rachel leaned back in her chair, gathering thoughts with the careful deliberation of someone who knew words mattered. She wore civilian clothes, probably off-duty, hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look even younger. Made her look like the daughter Sarah had held for exactly 3 hours before signing papers that said someone else would do the holding from now on. "I found out you were my birth mother 8 months ago," Rachel continued, voice steady but emotional underneath. "Adoption records aren't as sealed as people think if you know how to look. Military personnel files cross-reference in interesting ways if you have the right access. I saw your name, saw my original birth certificate, saw the woman who gave me life was the same woman training me in sniper tactics at Fort Benning. I wanted to tell you immediately. Wanted to run into your office and say I know and I understand and thank you." Rachel's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Soldier in control. "But I didn't tell you because I needed to be sure you'd respect me as a soldier first." not love me as a daughter, not feel obligated by biology. I needed to know that when you looked at me, you saw competence, skill, someone worthy of the Brennan name, even if I didn't carry it legally. So I waited. I excelled. I became the intelligence analyst you'd be proud to work with. And when you requested me for Vanguard, when you specifically asked for me by name, I knew I'd earned it, earned the right to eventually tell you the truth. Sarah's tears fell silent, tracking down her face as she watched the daughter she'd never known speak words she'd never hear except through the cruel gift of technology that preserved voices after bodies failed. I wanted to tell you after deployment, Rachel said, smiling now, genuine and warm. Wanted to sit down over coffee somewhere off base, somewhere normal, and say, Mom, I know. And I forgive you for giving me up. And I had a wonderful childhood with parents who loved me. And I still want to know you, not just as my commanding officer, but as my mother. I wanted to give you that chance. Give us both that chance. Rachel's expression hardened. Soldier replacing daughter. But then I found the corruption. Found evidence that someone high up was trading intelligence to cartels. Trading American lives for money or leverage or whatever makes traders sleep at night. I couldn't prove who specifically. The trails were too well hidden. Multiple officers, multiple transactions, all carefully laundered. But I knew it was someone with access to deployment schedules and convoy routes. Someone in the chain of command. She pulled files into frame, showed the camera evidence Sarah had already seen in the operator's ranch house. Financial records, communications intercepts. The patient work of an analyst who understood that patterns revealed truth if you were disciplined enough to see them. I'm writing a full report, Rachel continued, going to submit it through proper channels after Vanguard deployment, going to trust that the system works, that good people in command will investigate and root out the corruption. Maybe I'm naive, probably should have gone straight to CID or FBI, but I believe in the chain of command, believe in the institution. Maybe that makes me stupid. Maybe that gets me killed. Rachel leaned close to the camera, whispered like sharing a secret. If I don't survive deployment, I want you to know I figured out you were going to tell me eventually. I saw the way you looked at me during training, the way you'd start to say something then stop, the way you'd touch your chest where I imagine you keep some memento of the baby you gave away. Maybe a photograph, maybe a hospital bracelet, maybe just the memory of holding me before you had to let go. Sarah touched her chest reflexively, found the locket she'd worn for 28 years. Inside, a photograph smaller than a postage stamp. Newborn Rachel, 3 hours old, eyes closed, face peaceful. The only photograph Sarah had. The only tangible proof that for one brief moment, she'd been a mother. I wanted to make it easy for you, Rachel said on the screen. Wanted to be the one to say I already know, and it's okay, and I'd love to call you Mom if you'd love to hear it. I rehearsed it 100 times. Hi, I'm Captain Rachel Voss, but I was born Rachel Brennan, and you're my mother, and I love you. Just like that. Simple, clean, no drama, just truth. Rachel smiled again, sad and knowing and beautiful. I forgive you for giving me up. I understand why you did. 20 years old, deployed, no support system, career just beginning. You made the choice that gave me a better life. You sacrificed your motherhood so I could have a childhood. That takes strength most people don't have. That takes love deeper than possession. You gave me away because you loved me enough to want better for me than you could provide. That's not abandonment. That's grace. Sarah sobbed now, sound breaking free from chest, body shaking with grief that had waited 28 years to express itself. 28 years of carrying the weight. 28 years of wondering if she'd made the right choice. 28 years of hoping the daughter she'd never known had somehow understood. If this is all we get, Rachel said, voice gentle and final, if I die before I can tell you in person, then know this. You're a hero to me. Not because you're the greatest sniper in the Army. Not because you hold records or win medals or do impossible things. You're my hero because you gave me life twice. Once when you were born. Once when you gave me to parents who could give me everything you couldn't. That's sacrifice. That's love. That's what mothers do. Rachel sat back, warrior returning. But if I die and you're watching this, don't let it be for nothing. The corruption goes deep. The evidence is on this tablet. Use it. Expose them. Make sure no other soldiers die because someone in command decided math was more important than lives. Be the soldier I know you are. Be the mother I wish I'd gotten to know better. Be both. You're strong enough. The screen went to one more image, a photograph Rachel must have taken recently. Two women side by side, digitally edited. Sarah's official service photo next to Rachel's commissioning photo. Mother and daughter in uniform, eyes forward, hands raised in salute. The caption read, "Two generations, same honor, same duty, same heart." The video ended. Sarah played it again and again and again until she'd memorized every word, every expression, every moment of the daughter she'd lost twice. Once when she'd signed adoption papers at 20 years old. Again when she'd watched through a scope as mortars rained down on Vanguard and Rachel died believing in institutions that had betrayed her. The satellite phone buzzed. Message from Webb because zealots never stopped, never rested, never questioned whether their conviction was righteousness or madness. 63 hours until Syrian operation. I assume you found Rachel's tablet. I assume you watched her pathetic video about forgiveness and trust. I assume you're angry. Good. Anger makes people stupid. Stupid people make mistakes. I'll be counting on yours. Operator 12. Sarah typed response with hands that wanted to become fists, become weapons, become the violence burning in her chest. I'm coming for you, and when I find you, math won't save you. Webb's reply came instantly. You won't find me. I'm a ghost. But I left you a gift. Check Rachel's tablet. File labeled third way. Your daughter was smarter than you. She found a solution to the Syrian problem. One that doesn't require sacrifice. One that makes me irrelevant. Shame she died before she could present it. Shame you're not smart enough to execute it. 63 hours. Clock's running. Sarah found the file. Opened it. Read Rachel's analysis with growing understanding and terrible hope. Rachel had solved it. Had found the third way. Had figured out how to stop Iranian nuclear program without sacrificing Syrian FOB. It required coordination between Mossad, CYA, and Air Force cyber warfare units. Required precision timing. Required resources Sarah didn't have and authority she'd never possessed. Required miracles. But it was possible. Rachel had proven it was possible. The analysis was brilliant. Detailed operational plan showing how Israeli cyber team could insert Stuxnet variant during scheduled maintenance window at Iranian facility. Air Force providing satellite coordination. CIA ensuring physical access through asset already in place. Timeline showed 7 critical steps, each dependent on previous success, each with backup contingencies Rachel had calculated with the same precision she'd applied to everything. At the bottom of the document, Rachel had written a note. If you're reading this and I'm gone, please don't let them sacrifice 340 soldiers. There's always another way. I found it. You can execute it. Trust the plan. Trust yourself. Be the hero I know you are. Love, Rachel. Sarah called Agent Torres at 4 a.m., waking her from sleep that probably hadn't come easy anyway. I need help. Bigger than you. Bigger than FBI. I need someone with authority to coordinate black ops across multiple agencies on 72 hours notice. That's asking for a miracle, Kate. Rachel found a way to save the Syrian base. Stop Iranian nuclear program. Do it all without casualties. But it requires coordination I can't command. I need someone who can. Torres was quiet for long seconds. Then, I know someone. Retired CIA deputy director. Owes me favors going back to Fallujah. He might help. Might not. Depends on if he believes you. Set the meeting. I'll make him believe. The meeting happened in a diner outside Fort Hood at 6 a.m. Breakfast crowd providing cover and noise discipline. The man Torres brought looked 70 years old and dangerous in the way some old men are when age hasn't diminished their capacity for violence, just refined it. Edward Mason, retired Seawater Special Activities Division, 35 years in the darkness, doing things that couldn't be acknowledged or denied, now supposedly consulting for defense contractors and definitely running operations that didn't officially exist. Torres made introductions. Mason ordered coffee, black, and eggs scrambled, studied Sarah with eyes that had evaluated assets and threats across 5 continents. Agent Torres says you have intelligence on a domestic terror operation. Says you need resources to prevent it. Says you're trustworthy despite the fact that you've killed 2 people in the past week and are wanted for questioning regarding an explosion that killed 8 individuals, including your own father. That about covers it, Sarah said. I'm listening. Sarah laid out everything. Vanguard massacre. The operators. Webb's plan to sacrifice Syrian FOB. Rachel's alternative solution. The evidence on the tablet. The 72-hour deadline. She held nothing back because holding back was what the operators had done, and it had gotten 91 people killed. Mason listened without interrupting. Decades of intelligence work teaching him when to talk and when to absorb. When Sarah finished, he sat back, drank coffee gone cold, considered options that probably all led to his own destruction if things went wrong. The plan your daughter designed, Mason said carefully, requires assets I don't officially control, requires coordination with Israeli intelligence, which is always problematic, requires Air Force cyber units that answer to strategic command, not retired spooks drinking bad coffee, requires approximately 60 miracles and perfect execution. But it's possible. Possible and probable are different animals. I can make calls, can pull favors owed, can probably get most of what we need, but there's a problem. What problem? Marcus Webb. He's not working alone. Can't be. Operation of this scale requires support network, resources, safe houses, communications. Someone's backing him. Someone with deep pockets and deeper connections. You take out the Syrian operation, you don't stop Webb. You just make him adapt. Find new target, new sacrifice, new math to justify atrocity. Sarah had considered this, had run the scenarios during the 40-mile drive from Burning Ranch to storage facility. We stop the Syrian operation. We save the 340. Then we hunt Webb until he's dead or captured, one problem at a time. And if while we're saving Syria, Webb executes Plan B that kills 1,000? What if the Syrian operation is bait? What if he wants you focused there while he does something worse elsewhere? The thought had occurred to Sarah, had kept her awake during the hours between finding Rachel's tablet and making this call. Webb was smart, obsessive, wouldn't put all resources into one operation, would have contingencies, would have backup plans that made the primary plan look humane by comparison. What do you suggest? Sarah asked. Mason pulled out a secure tablet, typed commands that probably violated 6 federal laws. I suggest we split priorities. I coordinate the Syrian operation using Rachel's plan. You hunt Webb, find him before he can execute whatever nightmare he's planning next. We trust each other to handle our respective missions and hope that trust doesn't get everyone killed. I work better alone. You think you work better alone? Reality is, nobody works better alone. Alone gets you killed or compromised or so focused on one threat that you miss the others. I'll give you a team. Small, competent, people who've operated in gray zones and didn't break. 3 operators. You pick the mission parameters. They execute. Torres spoke for the first time since introductions. Kate, take the help. Rachel found the solution, but she didn't do it alone. She coordinated with analysts and intelligence networks and resources that multiplied her capabilities. You taught her that. Time to learn from your own lesson. Sarah looked at the tablet Mason pushed across the table. 3 dossiers. 3 operators Mason trusted. 3 chances to either save 340 soldiers or get everyone killed in the attempt. First file, Lieutenant Ryan Brooks, 24 years old. The kid from Fort Benning who'd learned about patience and wind reading in the gap between technology and wisdom. Mason had recruited him 3 days ago, pulled him into something Brooks probably didn't understand, but had agreed to anyway because young soldiers still believed in righteous missions. Second file, Sergeant First Class Tyler Cross, 36 years old, younger brother of Dylan Cross who died in the Vanguard massacre. Explosives expert, demolition specialist, someone with personal stake in stopping Webb and skills necessary to dismantle whatever nightmare Webb was building. Third file, Dr. Linda Park, 52 years old, former Army intelligence, now professor of Middle Eastern studies, spoke Farsi, Arabic, Hebrew, had connections with Mossad and Iranian dissident networks, the kind of academic who'd spent 20 years in universities but maintained contacts in the world of shadows and pragmatic violence. These 3, Mason said, can help you find Webb and stop whatever he's planning. Brooks provides tactical support and fresh perspective. Cross has personal motivation that makes him reliable. Park has intelligence networks that can track Webb's communications. Together, you might have a chance. And the Syrian operation? I'll coordinate with Mossad and cyber warfare units. Execute Rachel's plan. If it works, 340 soldiers come home alive and Iranian nuclear program gets delayed 10 years. If it fails, I take full responsibility and make sure nobody connects it to you. Either way, Webb loses. Either we stop his sacrifice or we expose it. Both outcomes deny him the martyrdom he craves. Sarah studied the three faces on the tablet. Young Brooks, who still believed experience mattered. Tyler Cross, who'd lost a brother and wanted blood or justice or both. Dr. Park, who understood that sometimes academic knowledge needed street application. Not the team she would have chosen, but maybe better than what she would have chosen, because her choices had gotten 91 people killed and Rachel's choices had almost saved them. When do I meet them? Sarah asked. They're outside in the parking lot, waiting for your decision. Torres vouched for you. I vouch for the mission. But they need to hear from you directly that this is worth dying for, because that's probably what it comes to. Webb is cornered, desperate. Zealots become most dangerous when their mission is threatened. Sarah walked to the parking lot where three people waited beside a black SUV that screamed federal operation despite its civilian plates. Brooks stood at attention when he saw her, muscle memory from too many months of military discipline. Tyler Cross leaned against the vehicle, arms crossed, expression hard and evaluating. Dr. Park sat on the hood reading a book, barely glancing up when Sarah approached. Master Sergeant Brennan, Brooks said. Sir, ma'am, I'm here to help however I can. At ease, Lieutenant. This isn't military operation. This is something else. Something that might get you killed and definitely get you court-martialed if it goes wrong. You sure you want in? Ma'am, you taught me that experience beats technology, that patience beats speed, that doing right beats doing easy. I'm here to learn the rest of the lesson, whatever it is. Tyler Cross pushed off the vehicle, moved close enough that Sarah could see the family resemblance to his brother Dylan. Same jaw, same eyes, same bearing that combat infantry developed when they'd seen enough death to respect it, but not fear it. My brother died in Vanguard, Tyler said, voice flat and controlled. Died believing in mission and chain of command, and all the shit they teach you to make killing seem noble. I want to know if his death meant something. And I want to make whoever killed him pay for it. You offering either of those things? Both if we're lucky, neither if we're not. Webb killed your brother. Webb is planning to kill 340 more. We stop him or we die trying. That's the mission. Good enough. Dr. Park closed her book, slid off the hood with academic grace. Master Sergeant, I've read your service record. Impressive. I've also read your daughter's intelligence analysis. Brilliant. She was smarter than most of the analysts I taught at the War College. I'm here because she deserves to have her work completed, and because Webb represents everything wrong with American foreign policy. The belief that violence is solution, that sacrifice is necessary, that math justifies atrocity. I'd like to prove him wrong academically, but I'll settle for proving him wrong operationally. Sarah looked at the three of them, mismatched and untested as team, probably insufficient for the mission ahead. Definitely her only option given time constraints and resource limitations. Webb has a head start, has resources, has commitment born from zealotry. We have 72 hours to find him and stop whatever operation he's planning while Mason handles the Syrian situation. Questions? Just one, Brooks said. What if we can't find Webb in time? What if the Syrian operation succeeds but Webb escapes? What's the end game? Then we keep hunting, for as long as it takes, until he's dead or captured or I am. Some debts don't expire. Some accounts don't settle. This is one of them. They worked from a safe house Torres provided, anonymous ranch property 40 miles from anything. The kind of place drug task forces use for witness protection and CIA used for activities that couldn't happen in official buildings. Tyler Cross swept the property for surveillance devices, found none, declared it clean enough for operational planning. Dr. Park set up communications gear that would make their signals bounce through enough proxies to appear to originate from 12 different countries. Brooks established security perimeter and early warning systems because young soldiers still believed in proper procedure. Sarah spread Rachel's files across a table that had probably hosted interrogations and planning sessions for operations that would never appear in official records. The evidence Rachel had compiled pointed to Webb's support network, shell corporations, offshore accounts, safe houses in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. Communications intercepts showing Webb coordinating with someone using the call sign Shepard. Shepard, Dr. Park said, studying the intercepts. That's old terminology. Cold War era, not cartel, not terror cell, someone from intelligence community, someone who's been in the game long enough to remember when operations had pastoral code names. Could be another operator, Tyler suggested. Someone who survived the ranch explosion. Someone backing Webb's play. All 8 operators died in the explosion, Sarah said, though the doubt crept in even as she spoke. I watched the building burn. No survivors. You watched it burn from outside, Park countered. Did you recover bodies? Did you confirm 8 casualties? Or did you assume because that's what Webb wanted you to assume? Sarah replayed the memory. Ranch house exploding. Guards neutralized. Tire tracks leading away. Webb's text message gloating about the operator's death. She'd assumed, had let grief and shock override tactical thinking, had made the mistake Webb counted on. We need to know if anyone survived, Sarah said. If there's another operator out there backing Webb, that changes everything. Brooks pulled up satellite imagery from the night of the explosion, thermal data showing heat signatures in the moments before and after the blast. 8 figures inside the building before explosion. 0 signatures after. Either everyone died or someone had thermal camouflage that blocks satellite detection. There's another possibility, Park said quietly. What if Shepard isn't an operator? What if it's someone new? Someone Webb recruited to replace the network he just destroyed? Tyler was already running searches through military databases, cross-referencing the call sign Shepard with active duty personnel. The results came back with 12 matches. 12 soldiers currently serving who'd used Shepard as call sign or handle during deployments. 11 were deployed overseas. 1 was stateside. Major Sarah Shepard, 42 years old, Army Intelligence, currently assigned to Strategic Command Headquarters, 20 years service, exemplary record. And according to her file, she'd served under Marcus Webb in Afghanistan 6 years ago. Could be coincidence, Brooks said. Could be, Park agreed. Or could be Webb recruited her years ago, groomed her, positioned her at Strategic Command where she'd have access to deployment schedules and operational plans. Access to everything Webb would need to plan the Syrian operation and whatever comes next. Sarah pulled Major Shepard's service photo. Professional, competent, the kind of officer who excelled at staff work and coordination and all the things that made modern military function. The kind of officer nobody suspected because competence was the best camouflage. We need to know if she's involved, Sarah said. Need to confirm before we commit to hunting her. I can do that, Park offered. Have contacts at Strategic Command, people who owe me favors, can make discreet inquiries about Shepard's recent activities, see if there's anything suspicious. While Park made her calls, Sarah studied the timeline Webb had provided. 63 hours when he'd sent the message. 58 hours now. Syrian operation scheduled for coordinated assault during shift change when maximum personnel would be vulnerable. Same playbook as the planned terror attack on the 12 bases. Same math. Same willingness to sacrifice some to prevent losing more. But Rachel's plan eliminated the need. Cyber warfare units could insert virus into Iranian nuclear facility systems. Stuxnet-style sabotage that would set program back years without single casualty. Israeli Mossad could provide physical access through asset already in place. Air Force could coordinate the upload during scheduled maintenance window when security would be minimal. Clean, surgical, no sacrifice required. The question was whether Mason could coordinate all the pieces in 58 hours, whether Israeli intelligence would cooperate, whether Air Force cyber units would participate in operation that skirted every legal boundary, whether any of it would work, or if Webb was right that sometimes math required blood. Park returned from her calls with expression that confirmed Sarah's worst suspicions. Major Shepard has been unusually active in past 72 hours. Multiple secure communications to undisclosed recipients, travel to off-base locations without logging destinations, and she requisitioned explosives from Strategic Command Armory. C4, 500 kilograms, enough to level a city block. Same amount that was in the cartel shipment Vanguard intercepted, Tyler said. Same amount Webb would need if he's planning something beyond Syria. Sarah felt the pieces falling into pattern. Webb hadn't just planned to sacrifice Syrian FOB. That was the distraction, the thing that would occupy everyone's attention while he did something worse with 500 kilograms of military-grade explosive. something that would justify the Syrian operation retroactively, something that would prove his willingness to make impossible choices was necessary. He's going to attack a target domestically, Sarah said, seeing it now, understanding Webb's calculation. Something big, something that kills hundreds or thousands, something that makes the Syrian sacrifice look reasonable by comparison. He'll let Mason stop the Syrian operation. Let us think we've won. Then he'll detonate explosives somewhere that proves he was right all along, that sacrifice is necessary, that the operators should have been allowed to continue. What target? Brooks asked. Sarah thought about Webb's psychology, about zealots and martyrdom, and the need to prove rightness even in defeat. Thought about targets that would maximize casualties and symbolic impact. Thought about places where military families gathered, where the loss would resonate with the people Webb claimed to protect. Fort Hood, Sarah said, main parade ground, during memorial service for Vanguard. 3 days from now, every family member of the 90 who died, every soldier from supporting units, probably 2,000 people gathered in one location. Perfect target for someone wanting to prove that preventing mass casualties requires accepting smaller casualties. That's insane, Brooks said. That's zealotry. Webb doesn't want to win. He wants to prove he was right. Wants to demonstrate that his willingness to sacrifice 90 soldiers prevented something worse. So he creates the something worse. Makes it happen specifically because we stopped him from stopping it. Circular logic that justifies his actions retroactively. Park pulled up schematics of Fort Hood Memorial Grounds. Multiple access points, underground utilities, maintenance tunnels, dozen places where 500 kilograms of C4 could be positioned for maximum casualties. And memorial service was public, open to families and press. Security would be present, but stretched thin across large area. We have 58 hours, Sarah said. Mason handles Syrian operation. We find Webb and Shepard, stop the Fort Hood attack, save 2,000 instead of 340. Prove Rachel's third way works not just in theory, but in practice. And if we can't find them in time, Tyler asked, then we evacuate the memorial, cancel the service, deny Webb his target. But that also means admitting defeat, means living in fear, means letting him dictate terms. I'd rather find him, stop him, end this. They split the mission. Brooks and Tyler would coordinate with Fort Hood security, begin searching for explosives, establish protocols for evacuation if needed. Dr. Park would track Major Shepard's communications, try to pinpoint her location. Sarah would hunt Webb directly, using the connections from Rachel's files, following the financial trails and safe house locations. 48 hours became 40. 40 became 36. Each hour brought them closer to memorial service and further from finding Webb. Brooks and Tyler searched 8 miles of utility tunnels beneath Fort Hood, found nothing. Park tracked Shepard to 3 different locations, arrived minutes after she'd departed each time, always one step behind someone who knew how to evade surveillance. Sarah hit 4 safe houses from Rachel's files, found 3 abandoned, found 1 occupied by cartel enforcers who'd never heard of Webb and wouldn't have talked if they had. The trail was cold. Webb had gone to ground, had resources and preparation that exceeded Sarah's ability to counter in the time remaining. With 24 hours left, Sarah sat in the safe house staring at Rachel's tablet, reading her daughter's words again, looking for patterns she'd missed, clues she'd overlooked, answer that would save 2,000 people and prove that impossible choices had solutions if you were patient enough to find them. Brooks found her at 3 a.m., brought coffee that tasted like defeat. Ma'am, security at Fort Hood wants to cancel the memorial. Move it inside to smaller venue, reduce attendance to immediate family only. They think it's safest option. That's surrender. That's 2,000 people going home alive. Sarah knew he was right, knew that tactical retreat was sometimes the only rational choice, knew that Rachel would have counseled patience and caution and living to fight another day. But surrender meant Webb won, meant his logic prevailed, meant accepting that sometimes sacrifice was necessary because finding alternatives was too hard. Tell security to give me 12 more hours, Sarah said. If we haven't found Webb by then, we cancel. We evacuate. We surrender this fight and regroup for the next. Brooks nodded, left her alone with coffee and doubt and the growing certainty that maybe the operators had been right all along. Maybe some choices were impossible because the math simply didn't work. Maybe zealots like Webb existed because the world needed people willing to do terrible things for arguably noble reasons. The satellite phone buzzed. Message from number Sarah didn't recognize. Master Sergeant Brennan, this is Major Sarah Shepard. We need to talk. I'm not what you think. Webb is using me, using all of us. And if you don't listen, 2,000 people die in 11 hours. Meet me alone. Coordinates attached. Come unarmed. Come now. This is the only chance. Sarah stared at the message, seeing trap written in every word, knowing that walking into obvious trap was exactly what Webb wanted. Understanding that sometimes the only move was the stupid one because smart moves had already failed. She typed coordinates into GPS, abandoned warehouse district on Fort Hood's edge, perfect ambush location, perfect place to die. She told Brooks where she was going, told him if she didn't return in 2 hours, assume compromise and proceed with evacuation. Told him Rachel's plan worked if people were brave enough to execute it, but sometimes bravery looked like accepting defeat. Then Sarah Kate Brennan, Master Sergeant, 48 years old, 2 years from mandatory retirement, walked into the darkness toward a meeting that would either save 2,000 lives or end hers. Behind her, the safe house lights stayed on. Ahead, the warehouse waited. And somewhere in the shadows, Marcus Webb counted down hours until he proved that impossible choices weren't impossible at all, just inevitable. The warehouse stood like a monument to industrial decay, broken windows catching moonlight, concrete walls marked by graffiti that said the city had forgotten this place existed and decided that forgetting was mercy. Sarah Kate Brennan approached on foot, weapon holstered despite every instinct, screaming that walking into obvious ambush unarmed was how soldiers became statistics. But sometimes the only way through was forward, and sometimes trust was a weapon more powerful than bullets. Major Sarah Shepard waited in the center of the main floor, illuminated by a single camping lantern that cast shadows long enough to hide armies. She was 42 years old according to her file, looked 50 in the harsh light, bearing the weight of choices that aged you faster than years. Her hands were raised, showing empty palms, showing vulnerability that could be genuine or performance depending on whether Webb had written the script. Master Sergeant Brennan, Shepard said, voice carrying across empty space. Thank you for coming. I know you think this is trap. It's not. Or rather it is, but not the kind you're expecting. Sarah stopped 20 feet away, close enough to see Shepard's face clearly, far enough to react if weapons appeared from shadows. You have 10 minutes. Convince me you're not working with Webb. Convince me you didn't help murder 90 people. Convince me not to put a bullet in you right now. I can't convince you of what isn't true. I did help Webb, did provide intelligence that made Vanguard massacre possible, did requisition the C4 he's planning to use at Fort Hood Memorial. I'm complicit. I'm guilty. I deserve whatever judgment you're planning to deliver. But I'm also the only person who knows where Webb positioned the explosives. And I'm the only chance you have of saving 2,000 lives in 11 hours. Sarah's hand moved toward her weapon. Why should I believe you? Because I loved Rachel Voss. The words hit like artillery rounds. Sarah's hand stopped moving. Shepard continued, tears tracking down her face in the lantern light. We served together 3 years ago, Fort Huachuca, intelligence school. She was 25 then, brilliant, funny, kind in ways the military usually beats out of people. We became friends. Then more than friends. We had 6 months together before deployment separated us. Best 6 months of my life. We promised to reconnect when tours ended. Promised to build something real. I never got the chance. She died at Vanguard before I could tell her I still loved her. Before I could tell her I'd left my husband, ended my marriage, chosen the life I wanted instead of the one I'd settled for. Shepard pulled photograph from her pocket, showed it to Sarah. 2 women in civilian clothes at a restaurant, smiling like people do when they believe the future holds something worth smiling about. Rachel younger, happier, 25 years old and alive in ways that video files couldn't capture. Webb recruited me 6 years ago, Shepard continued. Said I had potential. Said people with my skills were needed for operations that couldn't be official. I believed him. Believed in the mission. Believed sacrifice was necessary price for preventing catastrophes. I helped him plan operations, provided intelligence, facilitated logistics. I was Operator 13 before I understood what that really meant. You helped murder 90 people, including the woman you loved. I provided convoy route for Vanguard. Didn't know Rachel would be assigned to the unit. Didn't know Webb planned to trade them all for Chinese intelligence. When I found out afterward, when I learned Rachel died in operation I helped plan, I confronted Webb. Told him I was done. Told him I'd expose everything. He said if I did, he'd make sure everyone knew I was complicit. Make sure I'd spend rest of my life in Leavenworth. Make sure Rachel's memory was tarnished by association with me. So you kept helping him. I kept pretending to help him while gathering evidence, documenting everything, building case that would expose Webb and protect Rachel's legacy. I requisitioned the C4 because he ordered me to. But I also documented the requisition, recorded our conversations, created paper trail that proves he planned Fort Hood attack. I'm giving you that evidence, all of it, everything you need to stop him and prove what he is. Shepard pulled flash drive from pocket, held it out like offering at altar. Webb positioned explosives in 3 locations beneath memorial grounds. Utility Tunnel Junction Charlie 7, maintenance access point beneath parade stage, storm drainage system north of assembly area, 500 kilograms total, enough to collapse the entire section. I have schematics, detonation codes, everything your demolitions expert needs to disarm them. Sarah took the flash drive, studying Shepard for tells that would indicate deception. Saw only exhaustion and grief in the particular desperation of someone who'd realized too late that they'd served evil thinking it was necessity. Where's Webb? I don't know. He compartmentalized, never told me his location, never trusted me completely because he knew I'd been close to Rachel. He's probably watching right now. Probably has rifle trained on both of us. Probably hoping you'll kill me so he can claim I was traitor, working against him all along. Sarah scanned the warehouse shadows, seeing nothing but knowing that meant nothing when dealing with patient shooter in prepared position. If he's watching, why meet here? Why not somewhere safer? Because I wanted him to see me betray him. Wanted him to know that his zealotry cost him his last ally. Wanted him to understand that Rachel's death didn't create martyr. It created enemy. And I wanted to die knowing I'd done something right after doing so much wrong. The shot came from darkness, high-velocity round punching through Shepard's chest before the sound registered. Sarah dropped, rolled, found cover behind concrete pillar while Shepard collapsed, blood spreading across warehouse floor in patterns that looked black under lantern light. Sarah low crawled to Shepard, checked vitals, found pulse fading but present. The wound was bad. High chest, right side, exit wound, suggested the round had passed through without hitting heart, but had definitely compromised lung. Possibly nicked subclavian artery based on blood volume. Definitely fatal without immediate medical intervention, and maybe fatal even with it. Shepard coughed blood, grabbed Sarah's hand with strength that dying people shouldn't possess. Schematics on the drive, codes, everything. Save them. Save the 2000. Don't let my mistakes kill more people, please. I've got medic training. I can stabilize you until extraction arrives. No time. Webb's repositioning for second shot. Get out. Get to Fort Hood. Stop him. That's the mission. Another round sparked off concrete inches from Sarah's head. Webb had high ground, had prepared position, had all the advantages except one. Sarah had spent 28 years learning patience, learning how to read shooters, learning how to survive when survival seemed impossible. She pulled smoke grenade from her kit, one of 3 she'd carried despite promise to come unarmed because promises to zealots were tactical errors. Popped the canister, let white smoke fill the warehouse, obscuring sight lines and thermal imaging. Grabbed Shepard under the arms, dragged her toward exit while rounds punched through smoke, searching, missing, demonstrating that Webb was good but not great, skilled but not patient, dangerous but beatable. Outside, Sarah called for extraction, gave coordinates, applied pressure dressing from her medical kit to Shepard's chest wound. The bullet had entered high right chest, probably third intercostal space, exited posterior without hitting spine. Lung was definitely compromised, breathing shallow and bubbling. But if the subclavian was intact, if no major vessels were severed, if extraction arrived fast enough, survival was possible. Sarah tilted Shepard's upper body slightly to affected side, preventing blood from filling good lung, maintaining airway. Applied occlusive dressing to both entrance and exit wounds, burping the seal to prevent tension pneumothorax. Checked pulse, thready but present at 120 beats per minute. Blood pressure dropping but not crashed. Shepard was holding on. Rachel talked about you, Shepard whispered, each word costing effort. Said her birth mother was greatest sniper in the army. Said she hoped someday she'd be half as good. Said she understood why you gave her up. Said it took strength to choose someone else's happiness over your own. She loved you, even not knowing you. She loved the idea of you. Sarah's tears fell silent, mixing with blood and smoke residue, and the particular grief of learning your daughter loved you after she was dead and couldn't hear you say it back. I loved her too, every day, even from distance, even when I had no right to. You had every right. You were her mother. Biology doesn't stop being true just because paperwork says otherwise. She knew. Last month before deployment, she told me she'd figured out who you were. Said she was going to tell you after Vanguard. Said she wanted to call you Mom. The helicopter arrived 4 minutes later. Medevac team extracting Shepard with efficiency born from too many practice runs on too many dying soldiers. The flight surgeon, a woman in her 40s who'd seen every trauma war could create, worked with methodical intensity. Intubation, chest tube insertion, IV lines, blood transfusion. The whole emergency protocol executed in the cramped space of a moving aircraft. Sarah watched them lift off, watched the helicopter disappear into night sky, heard the flight surgeon's voice over radio updating base hospital. Penetrating chest trauma, right hemothorax, possible vascular injury. Patient critical but stable. ETA 4 minutes. Have trauma team standing by. This one's survivable if we move fast. Survivable. Not guaranteed, not certain, but possible. Sarah's phone buzzed. Brooks, calling from Fort Hood. Ma'am, we have the schematics Shepard uploaded. Tyler's analyzing detonation systems. We can disarm 2 of the 3 locations in time, but the third is complex. Redundant triggers. Fail-safes. We need more time or we need to evacuate. How much more time? 4 hours minimum. Memorial starts in 9. That gives us 5-hour window. Tight but possible if nothing goes wrong. Sarah knew Murphy's Law. Knew that nothing going wrong was fantasy that got soldiers killed. Knew that tight margins became death traps when zealots were involved. Evacuate. Start quietly. Security concerns. Credible threat. Get families out first. Then soldiers. Make it look routine. Ma'am, that tips our hand. Webb will know we're on to him. Good, let him know. Let him understand his plan failed. Maybe he surrenders. Maybe he runs. Either way, 2,000 people go home alive. And if he detonates early, out of spite? Sarah hadn't considered that. Hadn't factored in that zealots who couldn't win might choose to burn everything rather than accept defeat. How early can he detonate remotely? According to Shepard's intel, he needs line of sight to 3 separate receivers. Has to trigger them simultaneously or fail-safes kick in and shut down the system. He's probably positioned somewhere with view of all 3 locations. Probably elevated, probably within 2 miles of memorial grounds. Sarah pulled up satellite imagery of Fort Hood on her phone, studying terrain around Memorial area, looking for positions that offered sightlines to utility junction, maintenance access, and storm drainage. Found 12 possible locations, too many to search in 9 hours, too many to cover with the resources available. Unless she thought like Webb, thought like zealot, thought like someone who wanted audience for his righteousness, someone who needed witnesses to validate his sacrifice. He's not hiding, Sarah said, seeing it now. He's going to be at the memorial, in attendance, watching, waiting for maximum crowd before he triggers. He wants people to see him make the choice, wants them to know it was necessary, wants martyrdom that comes with being present for the atrocity. That's insane. That's zealotry. Start evacuation quietly. I'm coming to Fort Hood. I'll find Webb in the crowd. I'll stop him before he can trigger. Sarah drove 90 miles per hour through darkness, running scenarios, calculating odds, accepting that maybe this was how it ended. 48 years old, 2 years from mandatory retirement, dying while stopping madman from murdering 2,000 people at memorial service for the 90 she'd failed to save. Symmetry had its own poetry. Fort Hood security had begun evacuation when Sarah arrived. Families leaving in confused clusters, told about credible threat but not specifics, angry but compliant because military families understood that security protocols weren't suggestions. Sarah found Brooks coordinating the flow, young lieutenant who'd learned about patience, now learning about crisis management. Tyler's at utility junction working on the main charge, Brooks reported. Says he can disarm it, but needs 3 hours minimum. Park is with him providing technical support. Security is evacuating at rate of 200 people per 10 minutes. At this pace, we'll be clear in 90 minutes. What about the other 2 charges? Maintenance access is disarmed. Storm drainage is too complex. Tyler says let it blow. It's positioned to collapse drainage system, but won't affect surface structures if the main charge doesn't detonate. Webb designed them to work together. Individually, they're noise. Collectively, they're catastrophe. Sarah scanned the crowd, looking for Webb among the families and soldiers and press who hadn't evacuated yet. Looking for a man in his late 30s who'd spent 6 years believing math justified murder and devotion justified zealotry. Saw dozens of candidates, saw none that matched. Then she saw him, not in the crowd, on the roof of administration building overlooking memorial grounds. Visible through binoculars as silhouette against sky, holding device that looked like modified phone or tablet. Remote detonator, finger poised over screen. Watching evacuation with expression she couldn't read but could imagine. Disappointment, fury, determination to prove himself right even if it meant proving himself right to empty field. Sarah called Brooks. Webb's on admin building roof, eastern corner, has detonator. I'm going up. Ma'am, let security handle it. Let's SWAT extract him. You don't need to be hero. Not being hero, being soldier finishing mission. The climb took 4 minutes. Stairwell to roof access. Door that should have been locked, but Webb had disabled because he'd planned for this contingency, planned for discovery, planned for confrontation because zealots always plan for martyrdom scenarios. Webb stood 20 feet from roof edge, tablet in hand, watching Sarah emerge from stairwell with expressions somewhere between relief and resignation. He was 39 years old, looked 60 in the pre-dawn light, bearing weight of convictions that crushed normal people but sustained zealots through sheer force of will. Master Sergeant Brennan, Webb said, voice calm and controlled like discussing weather instead of mass murder. I wondered if you'd figure it out. Wondered if you'd stop the Syrian operation. Wondered if you'd find Shepard's evidence. I'm impressed. Your daughter would be proud. Don't talk about Rachel. Why not? She's relevant. She found the third way I couldn't see. Found solution that made sacrifice unnecessary. Found proof that maybe I was wrong about everything. I read her analysis. Brilliant. Thorough. If she'd lived, she might have convinced me. Might have shown me that math doesn't justify atrocity. That patience finds answers, violence misses. Then why continue? Why plan Fort Hood attack if you know you're wrong? Webb smiled, sad and strange. Because being wrong doesn't mean stopping. Because admitting I sacrificed 90 people for nothing is harder than sacrificing 2,000 more to prove the first sacrifice was necessary. Because I've gone too far to turn back. Because the only way out is through, and through means validating every choice I've made by making worse ones. That's insane. That's commitment. That's what your father understood, what all the operators understood. Once you make the first impossible choice, you're committed. You either keep making them and call yourself necessary evil, or you stop and admit you were just evil. I'm not ready to admit that. Sarah moved closer, hands visible, weapon holstered, presenting no threat while calculating how fast she could draw if Webb's finger moved toward the detonator. The memorial is evacuated. Families are safe. Soldiers are safe. You've got nobody to kill except me. And killing me doesn't prove anything except that you're a murderer. Killing you proves I was willing to do what needed doing, even when the person in my sights was legend. Even when the target was Sarah Kate Brennan, the Reaper, the woman who held position for 11 hours and made shot at 2,800 meters. Killing you proves commitment, proves I'm serious, proves you're coward, proves you hide behind math because facing what you really are would break you. Webb's finger hovered over the detonator. Your father faced what he really was, carried that weight for 40 years, died knowing he was a monster who'd saved thousands by sacrificing hundreds. I'm just following his example, being the monster this world requires. My father died regretting every choice, died wishing he'd found different way, died knowing that his math murdered his granddaughter. You want to follow his example? Try regret. Try admitting you were wrong. Try being human instead of calculator. Too late for that. It's never too late, not until you push that button, not until you cross the line that can't be uncrossed. You can stop, Marcus. You can surrender. You can face trial and judgment and maybe find some redemption in honesty. Or you can push the button and prove you're exactly what everyone thinks you are. Choose. Webb looked at the tablet, looked at Sarah, looked at the memorial grounds below where 2,000 people had been saved by evacuation and evidence, in the work of someone who believed in third ways. Rachel's plan worked, didn't it? The Syrian operation. Mason executed it. Iranian nuclear program delayed without single casualty. The third way was real. Yes. Then I was wrong. I sacrificed 90 people to prevent attack that could have been stopped differently. I murdered your daughter for nothing. I'm monster without excuse. You're human who made terrible choices. There's difference. Difference is redemption. Webb's finger moved toward the button. Sarah's hand moved toward her weapon. Time stretched into that space between heartbeats where decisions get made and lives get saved, or ended depending on who's faster, who's more committed, who's more willing to pull trigger when pulling trigger means everything. The shot came from distance. High velocity rounds striking Webb's hand, shattering bones, sending the tablet spinning from his grip to clatter across rooftop 50 feet away. Webb screamed, clutched his destroyed hand, fell to his knees while Sarah spun to identify shooter. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks stood at opposite edge of the roof, rifle steady, breathing controlled, 24 years old and calm as bedrock. The kid who'd learned about patience. The kid who'd made perfect shot at 400 meters with iron sights and steady hands, and the particular discipline that Sarah had taught him. Sorry, ma'am, Brooks said, approaching while maintaining sight picture on Webb. You said come unarmed. You didn't say I had to. Sarah cuffed Webb with zip ties, called for security, watched as military police extracted the zealot who tried to prove himself necessary and instead proved himself broken. Webb didn't resist, didn't fight, just stared at his shattered hand like it represented something larger than bones and blood and pain. The tablet sat where it had fallen. Sarah picked it up, studied the detonation interface, saw 3 triggers that Webb would have pressed simultaneously if Brooks hadn't been faster. Saw the countdown timer set for 9 a.m. when Memorial was scheduled to begin. Saw the fail-safes that would have prevented individual detonation but enabled collective catastrophe. She powered down the device, called Tyler to confirm utility junction charge was disarmed, got confirmation 3 minutes later that 500 kilograms of C4 had been rendered safe and Webb's plan had failed completely. Dawn broke over Fort Hood, painting the memorial grounds gold and soft and beautiful in ways that made Sarah remember why she'd served, why she'd sacrificed, why she'd believed that wearing the uniform meant something larger than individual ambition. She stood on the admin building roof watching sunrise, 91 dog tags hanging around her neck, 2,000 lives saved by patience and teamwork, and the daughter who'd found third way when everyone else had accepted that only 2 ways existed. The memorial service happened 3 days later, delayed but not defeated, 2,000 people gathering to honor 90 soldiers who died in Vanguard massacre and 1 intelligence analyst who died investigating the corruption that had killed them. Sarah had spent those 3 days preparing, writing speeches she couldn't deliver without breaking, practicing names she couldn't say without crying, accepting that some grief was too large for words, but demanded words anyway. The phone call came on the 2nd day. Fort Hood Hospital. Shepard had survived surgery, lung repaired, vascular damage minimal, no permanent disability expected. Critical condition downgraded to serious, serious to stable. She'd live to stand trial, live to testify, live to face consequences while also providing evidence that would dismantle what remained of Webb's network. Sarah visited the hospital room, found Shepard awake, breathing through oxygen cannula, chest tubes draining into collection bottles, but alive and coherent. Thank you, Shepard said, voice weak but steady, for saving me, for giving me chance to make this right. Rachel would have wanted that, Sarah replied. She believed in redemption, believed people could change. I'll testify against Webb, against everyone, full cooperation. I don't expect forgiveness, don't expect mercy, but I want Rachel's death to mean something. Want the corruption exposed completely. It will be. You'll make sure of that. Shepard reached for Sarah's hand, squeezed weakly. She loved you, talked about you constantly during our time together. Said her birth mother gave her life twice, once at birth, once by giving her to family who could provide what you couldn't. She was grateful. She was proud. She wanted you to know. Sarah stayed 10 minutes, listening to Shepard talk about Rachel, learning details about her daughter's life she'd never known, building picture of woman who'd existed beyond Sarah's imagination and exceeded every hope. When visiting hours ended, Sarah left with heart both heavier and lighter, carrying more grief but also more love. The memorial ground had been transformed. 91 chairs arranged in precise formation, each with photograph of the soldier it represented, each facing podium where families and friends would speak, each empty because the dead don't sit. They haunt and watch and demand that their lives meant something beyond the math that ended them. Sarah stood at podium, looking at 2,000 faces, seeing Bull Rodriguez's granddaughter in the front row, seeing Doc Kavanaugh's fiancé holding the engagement ring that would never be worn, seeing families of the 90 who trusted chain of command and paid for that trust with funerals instead of homecomings. "I'm Master Sergeant Sarah Kate Brennan," she began, voice steady because she owed them steady even if her heart was shattered. "I was Vanguard's overwatch. I watched them deploy. I watched them die. I followed orders to remain in position while they were slaughtered. I carry that weight. I'll carry it forever. And I'm here to make sure you know who they were. Not just names, not just casualties, not just numbers in someone's terrible equation. People, soldiers, family." She read the first name, Sergeant First Class Marcus Rodriguez, 52 years old. Everyone called him Bull, not because he was reckless, because once he committed to something, nothing could move him. He was going to retire after Vanguard, going to watch his granddaughter grow up, going to finally rest after 3 decades of service. He died protecting others, died the way he lived, unmovable. Sarah told Bull's story, his service record, his poker games, his laugh that sounded like grinding gears, his granddaughter who'd been cheated of the grandfather who'd promised to attend her quinceañera. 2 minutes that turned casualty into person, that made loss tangible, that proved Rodriguez had mattered beyond the math. She continued through the 90. Staff Sergeant David Williams, the preacher who'd held Bible study and died with Psalm 91 clutched to his chest. Sergeant Emma Kavanaugh, Doc who'd saved 12 lives in previous deployment and died trying to save more. Captain Felix Ortega, father of 3, whose children would grow up without the man who'd written them letters every day he was deployed. Each name got a story. Each story got 2 minutes. 3 hours of testimony to lives that deserved more than memorial services, but received at least this public acknowledgement that they'd existed, they'd served, they'd mattered. When Sarah reached the 91st name, she stopped, breathed, felt the weight of what came next. Captain Rachel Voss, 28 years old, intelligence analyst, brilliant, thorough. She discovered the corruption that led to Vanguard massacre. She was investigating, building evidence, trusting that the system would protect her if she did everything by the book. She was wrong. The system failed her. But she didn't fail the system. Her intelligence, her analysis, her work saved 340 soldiers who were going to be sacrificed in Syria. Saved them posthumously, saved them by being so good at her job that even death couldn't stop her from protecting others. Sarah's voice cracked, but she forced the words out. "Rachel was my daughter. I gave her up for adoption 28 years ago. She found out 8 months before she died. She didn't tell me. She wanted to earn my respect as soldier before revealing our relationship. She succeeded. She exceeded. She was better soldier than I'll ever be because she believed in the system even when the system was broken. Because she found third ways when everyone else accepted impossible choices. Because she chose hope over cynicism and truth over expedience and honor over survival." Tears fell, but Sarah didn't wipe them away. Let 2,000 people see Master Sergeant cry for daughter she'd lost twice, for soldiers she'd failed to save, for the weight of service that crushed even the strongest eventually. "I'm here because they're not. I survived because they died. I carry 91 names around my neck, and I'll carry them until my last breath. And I promise you, I swear to you, I will make sure their deaths meant something. We'll make sure the corruption that killed them gets exposed. We'll make sure no more soldiers die because someone decided math was more important than lives. This is my mission now. This is my purpose. This is how I honor them." She stepped back from podium, let others speak, let families share memories and grief, and the particular pain of losing someone who volunteered to serve and deserved better than sacrifice without consent. The service lasted 5 hours. Nobody left early. Nobody checked phones. Nobody treated it as obligation. 2,000 people bearing witness, creating space for grief that couldn't be contained but had to be acknowledged. Afterwards, Sarah visited the memorial stone that would be placed permanently at Fort Hood. 91 names carved in granite. 91 lives reduced to letters and dates and the phrase that tried to capture something uncapturable. they served with honor. General Edward Mason found her there, retired CIA officer who'd coordinated the Syrian operation and validated Rachel's third way. Master Sergeant, the operation succeeded. Israeli cyber team inserted virus during maintenance window. Iranian nuclear program corrupted. Estimated delay 7 to 10 years. 0 casualties. Your daughter's plan worked perfectly. She would have been proud. She would have been proud of you. You proved third way exists. You stopped Webb without becoming Webb. You chose law over revenge even when revenge would have been easier. That takes strength most people don't have. Sarah touched the memorial stone, tracing Rachel's name with fingers that shook slightly from exhaustion and grief and the particular relief of someone who'd survived when survival had seemed impossible. What happens to Webb? Trial by court-martial. 27 counts of murder for Vanguard plus conspiracy, treason, attempted mass murder for Fort Hood. He'll spend rest of his life in Leavenworth if he's lucky. Death penalty if he's not. Major Shepard is recovering well. Doctors say full recovery expected in 6 weeks. She'll testify against him. Will face her own charges, but with cooperation and mitigating circumstances, probably looking at 10 years instead of life. And the operators, the network, exposed, all of it. Your testimony plus Shepard's evidence plus Rachel's intelligence. Department of Defense is conducting full investigation. Inspector General, congressional oversight, the works. It's messy, it's public, it's ugly, but it's justice. Imperfect justice, slow justice, but still justice. Sarah nodded, accepting that justice didn't always look like Hollywood endings, that sometimes justice was bureaucratic investigations and plea deals and the slow grinding wheels of accountability that seemed inadequate, but were still better than the alternative. I have a question for you, Mason said. What will you do now? You've got 18 months until mandatory retirement. You could coast, could teach, could fade away quietly, or you could do something else, something that continues what you started, what Rachel started. What did you have in mind? I'm forming a unit, unofficial, off books, targeting threats that conventional forces can't touch. Corrupt officials, domestic terrorists, bad actors who hide inside the system and use it against the people they're supposed to protect. We need operators who understand the gray zones, who can work in shadows without becoming shadows, who remember that the mission is protecting people, not protecting institutions. Sounds like the operators with better intentions. It's nothing like the operators. Operators made decisions unilaterally, sacrificed without consent, believed math justified anything. This unit, we work within legal framework. We coordinate with oversight. We get authorization before we act. We're transparent about methods even if missions stay classified. We're what the operators should have been if they'd remembered they were soldiers instead of gods. Sarah looked at the 91 names, felt their weight, understood that carrying them meant more than memorial services and speeches. Meant continuing the work. Meant making sure their deaths prevented future deaths. Meant finding third ways and proving patience beat violence and experience beat zealotry. I'm in, Sarah said, but I have conditions. Name them. I choose the missions. I vet every operation, and if I think we're crossing the line, if I think we're becoming what we're fighting, I walk and I burn it all down. No hesitation, no loyalty to institution over principle. Rachel believed in the system, and the system killed her. I won't make that mistake. Mason extended his hand. Deal. Welcome to Ghost Protocol. Operator 1. 18 months later, Sarah Kate Brennan stood in classroom at Fort Benning, teaching advanced sniper tactics to 20 students who looked impossibly young and impossibly eager. She'd retired from active duty at 50 with full honors and pension, and the particular respect soldiers give to someone who'd served 29 years without breaking or compromising or losing themselves in the moral gray zones where most people drowned. But retirement wasn't fading away, wasn't disappearing, was continuing the mission in different form, teaching the next generation, showing them that experience mattered, that patience beat technology, that third ways existed if you were disciplined enough to find them. Lieutenant Brooks was there, now Captain Brooks, helping teach, demonstrating shots that younger students thought impossible until he made them routinely. Tyler Cross visited sometimes, guest lecture on demolitions and ethics and the weight of carrying names around your neck. Dr. Park coordinated intelligence training, teaching students that understanding culture mattered more than understanding weapons. Sarah's phone buzzed during class break. Secure message from Mason. New mission. Corrupt defense contractor selling military tech to hostile nations. Congressional oversight had failed. Legal system had been circumvented. Someone needed to investigate. Someone needed to stop it. Someone needed to do it right. She looked at her students, looked at the photograph on her desk showing Rachel in uniform, looked at the 91 dog tags she still wore beneath her civilian shirt, and made her choice. She texted Mason one word, when. His response came immediately. Tonight, Ghost Protocol activates at 2200. Briefing packet uploading now. Sarah dismissed her class early, told them to practice the fundamentals, reminded them that patience was weapon and experience was armor, and doing right was harder than doing easy, but worth it every time. Then she drove to secure location where Ghost Protocol operated, where missions were planned and executed by people who'd seen the darkness and chosen to fight it instead of become it. The briefing room held 6 operators: Mason, Brooks, Cross, Park. 2 others Sarah had vetted personally, both veterans who'd served with honor and carried weight without breaking. They gathered around table covered in intelligence files, satellite imagery, the digital infrastructure of modern warfare translated into physical artifacts because some things work better when you could touch them. Defense contractor is selling F-35 schematics to 3 different hostile nations, Mason began. Profits estimated at $200 million. Congressional investigations stalled by lobbyists and campaign contributions. Legal prosecution blocked by classified information privileges. Traditional channels have failed. We are the last resort. Sarah studied the files, seeing pattern that reminded her of Vanguard, of the operators, of all the times people with power had decided laws were suggestions and accountability was for other people. What's the mission parameter? Infiltrate, gather evidence that can be used in criminal prosecution, extract, no casualties if possible, no publicity until prosecution is secured. We're not vigilantes. We're intelligence operators doing what the system can't do itself. And if the contractor resists, if they're willing to kill to protect their profits, Mason met her eyes and Sarah saw the understanding there. The recognition that sometimes doing right meant accepting that people you were trying to save might shoot back. Then we adapt. We respond proportionally. We defend ourselves, but we don't execute. We don't become judges. We gather evidence and we let the system work even when the system is slow. Sarah nodded, accepting the parameters, accepting that this was different from the operators. That oversight and authorization and transparency made all the difference between justice and murder, even when both used similar methods. I'm in. When do we deploy? 72 hours. Gives us time to plan, coordinate, ensure we've got legal authority and proper channels. This isn't cowboy operation. This is surgical. This is professional. This is how it should have been done all along. Sarah gathered the briefing materials, studied target profiles, began planning approach vectors and contingencies in the 1,000 small details that separated successful operations from disasters. This was her purpose now. This was how she honored the 91. Not with revenge, not with rage, with service, with patience, with the belief that third ways existed and experience could find them if given time and trust, in the particular discipline that came from carrying weight without breaking. The mission would be dangerous, would risk lives, would exist in gray zones where law and ethics became complicated, but it would be authorized, would be overseen, would be accountable, would be everything the operators weren't. And if it went wrong, if Sarah found herself facing impossible choice between following orders and doing right, she knew which she'd choose. Rachel had taught her that. The 91 had taught her that. Experience had taught her that. Some choices weren't impossible. Some were just hard. And hard was what soldiers did. Hard was what Sarah Kate Brennan had done for 29 years. Hard was what she'd keep doing until her last breath. For Rachel, for the 90, for everyone who'd believed service meant something larger than self. She touched the dog tags beneath her shirt, felt their weight, their presence, their demand that she keep going, keep fighting, keep proving that experience and patience and honor mattered more than math and expedience and the terrible logic that turned people into numbers. The mission briefing continued. Sarah listened. Sarah planned. Sarah prepared. And somewhere in the distance, in the space between heartbeats where the world went perfectly still, she whispered 91 names like prayers. like promises, like the only math that mattered.